Boom. If you're out there somewhere, wherever you are in the world, still trapped in a physical body, say what's up in the chat. Let me know if my audio is working, and we will get this show in motion. We'll give it a few moments. Word out on the streets is everybody on the internet's going live right now. So if you're here for this moment in time, which it looks like we are operational. If you're here present at this moment in time, we want you to know that those of us here at the Remember Your Mission YouTube channel, we certainly appreciate your patronage, and we ask that you just hit that like button as you enter the room. And anyway, greetings everyone. 2 times in 1 week. I don't know how we did it, but we did. New timeline. Who this? You know what I mean? Somehow it seems to be the right thing to do right now. Although I've noticed February historically has been somewhat of a month of like weird initiatory steps. I noticed that in like recent years where I'm always like, what? What is that? What does that mean? I don't know. I have no idea. But nevertheless, we are here. And I do want to apologize to everyone. I guess we were looking for yesterday's show at our regular weekly time. We had a host of just like nothing bad, just everything in the world was going on yesterday. And it's like, oh, shit, now I have to go do that show. And so it was just better. Like the timing was better, everything about it was better. That said, since everyone in the world is online today, I don't know how many of you will be joining us, but if you're here, thank you. Thank you for being part of the group of bizarre humans that somehow heard the call, or maybe you just got the YouTube notification. But anyway, how's everybody doing out there? I'm assuming the audio is working, but based upon our past experiences, you never really know. So hopefully, hopefully we're operational. And let me know if you have any questions before we get started. We did do a reading live stream the other day. It's okay. I'm pretty sure it's working. So there we go. I see people in the chat. My chat's wildly delayed right now. But anyway, I have a feeling that'll catch up. But so we did a reading live stream. I think that was Monday, which is weird, just because I thought it was Tuesday when it was Monday, which is, that's the thing that'll happen when you're outside of space and time. In fact, days don't mean days don't matter anymore. Well, that's not true. They actually do, but anyway, so we did a reading live stream just a couple of days ago, and it was the first time we did one by donation in a while. I don't know if that's the best idea because I noticed a number of people donated through PayPal, and I did not receive any notifications for that. So a few people out there in internet world got a little refund from me. I sent everybody their money back. I hate doing that. Like when people do those shows and they're like, okay, everybody, wants to do a reading, and certain, people will kind of donate in and ask for a question, or, ask their question, and then it doesn't get seen. I don't know why. I have a hard time with that. So I'm always like, here, you can, come again next time and we'll see what we can do. But anyway, thanks for being here, you guys. Okay, cool. White Swan says audio is good. I think I got the right microphone on. Let me make sure. Yes, yes, we do. What's up, Joanna? How's it going? Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Somehow, some way, it's still working. I don't know how. I don't know how that goes, but it's been a wild month as well. I think this is something we were talking about on Monday, but I mean, the year really started off with a blisteringly wild pace of like change and violence and upheaval and just bizarreness that it really, you guys are gonna, some of you won't like what I'm gonna say. It really makes me look forward to what the rest of it has to bring us as we go through the coming months. And just before we get started, just a quick comment, just on the news of the moment. Isn't it wild how Jeffrey Epstein is everywhere once again, like literally on every AI meme and in every website? And isn't it crazy how suddenly, all of a sudden, he became somehow the fall guy for every form of conspiratorial kind of stories that have been passed around? Almost like, and, I'm sure there's plenty of guilt due his direction, but almost like they're using him as this focal point to sort of kill off or to sort of, suppress certain, stories or so-called conspiratorial things that are going on in the world. Almost like if they can attach his name to it after death, people will completely disregard everything that it was said, even if there's anything true in there. And I guess I'm just kind of noticing that already as I've watched, little snippets of the news over the past few days. It's crazy to see. It's just wild to notice the kind of like the waves of so-called disclosures, quote unquote, having to do with many things that those of us in these communities, this is such old news to those of us. I'm not saying it makes it good or bad or right or wrong. It's just for a lot of us, these themes are like really old news, and we've been following them for, almost a decade now. These stories. It's just interesting to see these points along the journey where the powers that be attempt to tie up a number of loose ends by attaching them to a goalpost that's literally dead. And some people out there say, well, he's still alive. And I actually would like to leave the door open for that. I think it's possible. There's a possibility within that. But anyway, I don't want to get too far lost in the weeds of like commenting upon socio-political bullshit, because we have a very different mission here today. And it is, well, you guys already know. For those of you guys that are following along, we are entering, this is our 10th episode. I think I mentioned this the other day, but I did misquote the number of last episode was episode 9. And so we're working our way through this lengthy volume of deeply personal experiences, and the ones we're getting into today, I do want to apologize again, because last week I really front loaded everybody. And I was like, hey guys, we're going to do this really triggering chapter, it's about vampirism and this and that, and then we just didn't even read it. You know what I mean? And I think part of that was just because the last chapter was long. Another part of that is because I have a problem keeping things short. And then I would say the third problem is I feel this need to comment on like everything that I've written. And I'm hoping that that's a good thing for those of you that are listeners. I know from the perspective of me as a reader, or a person that is interested in just kind of hearing the bizarreness of people's lives, to me it is helpful to hear, the internal details and like why we did what and all of the other things around it. And I know for some people, they get kind of like lost in all the details. And so wherever you are, like wherever you fit in within the storytelling process that for some reason we're doing this year, I don't know how long it's going to take. This is going to be a fun one. This was actually, when I look back on my experiences in Los Angeles in, like what was that, 2017 to 2020, in like the early days, this was one of those experiences that changed. And it sounds like a exaggeration once again, because we always use these hyperbolic terms in here, but it was one of those experiences that changed everything for me in terms of how I understood what darkness, entities, vampirism, negative forces. It was like one of the first real examples that I had where I got to learn it's not the way they tell you on Facebook. It's not the way they tell you in their, YouTube live streams where they say some demons crawling up the wall like a horror movie, and they open up all the cabinets in your kitchen and oh my God, suddenly the lights flicker on and off. No, no, no. It's a whole completely utterly different process. And so that's what we're getting into here today. But anyway, let me know if you have any questions, comments before we begin. White Swan says, I'm old enough to remember everyone 10 years ago telling us Jeffrey Epstein was right. I remember this too. I think you and I are probably near the same age. Was a legit dude, and not I don't think we can say that one easily on YouTube. What at all when Donald J. Trump brought him up in mainstream interview. Yeah, you know what, it's interesting to look back and see how everyone pandered and like protected and sort of softened the blow for everything that guy did. And I want to be real, I don't see him as the prime evil of that force. Once again, I don't even know if we can say that term, involving children. I don't see him as the prime evil ringleader of that, which is why it was really easy for me to look at that and go like, I realize we're never going to get the true story on this guy. And that's part of the game, because there are dozens, probably more, hundreds, I don't know how many more thousands maybe. There's, thousands of other strange islands, and it's just interesting to watch the disclosures surrounding the way power is generated on Earth. The way power is generated on Earth. Not all power, but the type of power used to command the world that we are living in right now, at least on a surface level. It's interesting to note the ways and means through which, men have chosen to, extract that power from our world. It's a creepy thing. But anyway, so we're going to get into the reading here today. Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions here, but we're just scanning through the chat. What's up, Queen Victor? I think you were the one of the ones that wanted to get a reading. I'm sorry I missed you. We're gonna do another reading live. I think like if I have the energy to sustain it, I think we'll do that maybe like once a month. We'll do a reading kind of specific live stream. We might do it more than that, depending on if I feel called to it. But it's fun for me outside of the realm of Patreon to do those, because I've just noticed for the past few months, most of the reading lives we've done have been either on Typical Skeptic or in Patreon. So anyway, thank you. We can just call them a PDF file. Yeah, right. Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess you can. Queen Victor says it's our intention that feeds them. Yeah, no, really. I'm with you. Okay. Let us begin, ladies and gentlemen. So for those of you guys that want to follow along, some of you guys have already read this. If you've hung out with me over the past few years, I've even told this story a lot, I would say. There's a lot of like main points, like things that occurred that I've talked about with people at many different intervals. And then there's some details that I might get in today that aren't mentioned in the book. One in particular, I think is important to mention. Hopefully, I'll remember that as we go through. But anyway, I don't see any other questions. Boom. So we're going to begin at page 150. This is the chapter entitled "Affair with a Vampire," which sounds dumb, right? But that's literally what it was. Okay. So we shall jump in right now. We're on page 150, An Affair with a Vampire. Before we begin, I feel prompted to say this because there was a lot of bizarreness to this experience that I think doesn't fit in with what we would call the framework of the spiritual community that many of us belong to. You know what I mean? The disclosure, SSP scenes, all that stuff. I feel prompted to give a disclaimer that many of the things that we might discuss over the coming pages, upon experiencing them, were very, very different from what I was told the way such powers worked in this world. And I feel important to say that this is exactly, absolutely, 100% unequivocally what occurred in my life. It'll sound wild to some people, but this is literally it. And so from page 150, during the first few months of my professional journey, I had an experience that forever altered my understanding of what negative entities and dark spirits were actually like in this human realm. As wild and fanciful as it may sound, I can only call it exactly what it was: an affair with the vampire. For some, just reading that word brings up a series of folklorical tales or different forms of Hollywood portrayal, often involving some kind of blood drinking ritual, or the more modern version, right? Something glamorous, sexy, maybe even the type that sparkles in the sunlight. A tragic hero fighting against dark forces for the fate of humankind, or some other form of contrived bullshit. I wish I could say that was the reality for me. In fact, I would have loved it to be some kind of dark and, dangerously romantic experience. But the reality is, it ended up being something that deeply affected me, even to this day, and not in the ways that one might expect. Our initial introduction occurred in December of 2017, although if you know me, I'm pretty bad with dates, so it might have even been in November, October even. What I know for sure is that it was within the first few months of my arrival, and it was almost as if old acquaintances or even certain beings were attempting to make themselves known in my life once again. In looking back, it really was one of the most exciting and also pivotal stages of self-discovery. I had no idea what was coming from one day to the next. It had become a time in which I had already learned to expect the unexpected, but there was really no way I could ever have known what was about to walk in the door. It was about 3 or 4 p.m. one afternoon during the time of year in which the sun starts going down so ridiculously early that it was like as soon as noon passes, you enter into this prolonged period of strange golden twilight until a sudden darkness overtakes everything. I deeply enjoyed that time of my life there. I would take long breaks when business was slow and just walk around the Los Feliz neighborhood, listening to music and smoking weed out of a little one hitter pipe. One particular day, upon returning to the store just after wandering around, I recall a woman standing in front of the window examining the photos of practitioners and psychics who were in that day. I want to say she was maybe around 5'4" in height, very dark hair, in her mid to late 40s at the earliest, but also holding a strange type of mystery, something that actually caused me to look twice, and not in a lustful way by any measure. Just one of those people you'd see out in the world and would sneak a second take at, just wondering, huh, what's going on there? At that moment, I realized I had seen her sitting at a table at the Vietnamese restaurant next door as I walked out earlier. A part of me wondered, is she here to see me? I had already come to this strange knowing in which I could somehow just look at a person and tell if they were going to book with me. But in this case, I didn't really give her too much thought and just walked inside. That's the first place where I'm going to pause and tell you that at this stage of my life, there were so many people coming into that door every day that it was every hour or so, as you would walk outside, there would be people standing there looking at these images they would have of these, psychics or readers or, whatever it was that was working that day. And they had this bulletin board in front of the store, and people would just stop by and look at it and go, oh, you know what I mean? And it's funny to think that out of all the people that had come through that area that I would look at and not give a second glance to, for some reason, from the very beginning, it was like one of those things where you're just going along here and you're like, hmm. And you just keep going. And there's no message, there's no warning, there's no emotion, there's no anything attached to it. You're just like, huh, interesting. And you just keep on going. And so a few minutes later, one of the front end employees came into the back and said, Amanda is here to see you. She had this air of portrayed supremacy in her voice, as if she was introducing a king or queen. It was kind of odd in a way to bring someone in, but I had already become used to unique bizarreness of that little world. And by the time I replied with Amanda who, I saw she was already standing behind the girl waiting to walk in. As she sat down, I took a moment to study her face. Face reading is one of the most invaluable intuitive tools one can develop, and I was getting a daily crash course in it. She looked to be in her late 40s and had the face of what I can only describe as a witch. Not a haggard, creepy Disney witch, but almost like a younger, far more attractive Marina Abramovich. That type of face. She seemed tired and depleted in some way that I did not understand. I noticed it was as if one moment she seemed very young, and seconds later I could see this very old, weakened energy pass by her face. It was almost like she was struggling to hold something in. She explained that she had been under attack from someone from her past and needed to be cleared of his energy. There was little discussion, and I could tell she wasn't going to give any, so I defaulted to asking about the symptoms she was experiencing, which is very helpful when a client is unwilling or unable to go through the series of past events that led them to you. I'll pause there to say that is still a practice that I do now to this very day. Literally, as of this morning, people will come in to see me. It's like, well, how's it going? What's going on in your world? What's happening with you? And, people at times, it's very easy for them to speak to the discomfort or the issues that they're going through. And at other times, you'll encounter people who they'll be very guarded, or at times they're unable to speak about certain things, or in some cases, they just don't want to. And they're just like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And likewise, you will also have people who will come in and quiz you, and they'll be like, well, can't you tell you're a psychic? I've had that so, oh my God, so many times. So like, I won't even get into the stories. We're like, well, can't you tell what's wrong with me? And it's like, trust me, the things I'm gonna say right now are not the things you're looking for. So let's talk about it first. You know what I mean? It's like you really want to pull that out, we can do it. But anyway, there was little discussion, and I could tell she wasn't going to give any. So I defaulted to asking about the symptoms she was experiencing, which is very helpful when a client is unwilling or unable to go through the series of past events that led them to you. Her list of symptoms and difficulties were as vague as they come: tired, weak, depressed, in constant fear that some person was going to return into her world and take something from her, but no explanation of what it was or how they'd do it. The absolute truth of this situation is that I barely heard a word she said. Totally real. My mind suddenly drifted wildly through all kinds of memory fragments from years past, and in looking back, it was as if she or some force of energy within her was probing my mind in a deliberate way, accessing memories, feeling me out in a way I had not experienced yet, not knowingly at least. After a brief talk, I commenced to doing a short 30-minute energy clearing on her. At that stage of the journey, my technique was much more physical, and I would often pull energies from people's fingers, their temples, the tops of their heads by gently touching one fingertip to a specific area of the body and using it as a magnet or a conductive tool to send or receive energy. Those who have encountered me and done sessions at events or conferences over the last few years will attest to this as well, and it's remarkably effective. I recall in doing so with Amanda that I could feel a form of desire within her, but I did not readily identify it as being for or toward me. It was like a need of sorts, visceral and deep, but also willingly obscured, like she was holding it down in a sense. I would say, in looking back, that was the biggest feeling of all. It was like something was like, shove it down and like, I'm okay. And you just have this look of like something's wrong, and they're like, I'm okay, and you're like, you're obviously not okay, but whatever, and so it was like something was hidden, like some sort of deep, kind of like, it sounds cheap, like a movie. It was like one of the first energies I ever encountered from this person was insatiable hunger. And I couldn't say it was for food. I couldn't say it was for sex. I couldn't say it was for anything. I didn't know what it was for at that time. I was just like, whoa, damn. You're just like, wow, I feel it. And so, getting back to it, our work in that initial session was unremarkable, and I was quite removed from it all, which is why I have to admit I was a little shocked to hear her ask me if I could teach her the very technique I had just used. At that stage, I had never even considered teaching anyone anything ever, but it was funny because she was one of the first people who ever suggested that would be such a thing for me. Honestly, she might have been the first one. This was in the first 3 months of doing this work professionally, at a stage in my life where I had no training. It was like, you guys have heard this story. A switch turned on and boom, all of a sudden I was doing this work. And she was I think she was officially the first one that was like, I want you to teach me what is it you're doing. And I was like, what? You know, but getting back to it, my answer was non-committal. And she left shortly thereafter with a lot more vitality and presence than she had when she came in, which in hindsight was evidence I had done at least one thing right. Fast forward to about 1 week later, and she appeared once again much earlier in the day, dressed very differently, in some kind of all black, ultra fashionable outfit that seemed a little too much in a way. She had booked a reading that morning, but they didn't tell me ahead of time, so it was a surprise. She came in and asked me to read cards for her. Once again, I have no memory whatsoever of the questions she asked or the subject of our reading. I mean, really, I had no idea. I was like, okay. And you just go through the motions of like doing this thing. Her energy was much higher. She was in a much more talkative mood. And out of nowhere, she asked me if she could buy me lunch from the restaurant next door. You know, that moment where you're like, oh, and now I want to give you something. And it's like, and anyway, let's go back to it. It's odd because somehow during those days, the last thing I wanted was to be involved with a woman on any level. That sounds wild, right? It's crazy to think, but it's absolutely true. It was a rare period in my life in which the urge for sex or attraction had been removed from my body. I know that sounds crazy and impossible to some people. Maybe it was a blessing, maybe it was a curse. It was just a time in which I was obsessed with something else. And I was so obsessed with something else and so dedicated to it every single day that it was one of those rare periods in your life where every single thing falls away around you and none of it matters and you don't care about any of it. In fact, every time something is dangling in front of your face, you're like, "Oh no, I have to go do this. Sorry." You're just like, "Nope." And that's how it was at that stage of my life, which is crazy because, I was in a divorce. I had left a previous relationship for many years. And it was like the switch was turned off that said, you're going to go find another relationship. The switch was turned on that said, you're now going to devote yourself to this path and nothing else is going to get in the way. And that's kind of where I thought I was at that stage. And so she showed back up. She asked me at lunch, and it's odd because somehow during those days, the last thing I wanted was to be involved with a woman on any level. It's crazy to think that, but it's absolutely true. It was a rare period in which the urge for sex or attraction had been removed from my body. I realize that may be hard to imagine thinking of how men are traditionally wired, but it was my reality at that stage, and I'm grateful for it because somehow it kept me out of trouble. It wasn't something I was looking for. It wasn't something I desired. And truth be told, this is the lame part. She was not actually a person I would have ever considered hooking up with on any level. Like never. And not because of a hideousness, it's just not in your, you know what I mean? Not in your category. You're just like, huh? No, and not negative. You just don't, it's not in your realm of possibility. And so, truth be told, she was not actually a person I would have ever considered hooking up with on any level. In hindsight, there was a sign of some kind of highly accelerated ability of energetic attraction that she held because I immediately said yes. It was weird. It was like I didn't want to, and I was like, yeah, okay. Just like, huh? And then I realized, like, oh, now, all right, and I have to go do like social interaction time. You know what I mean? Now I have to do an exchange of conversation with you, which I'm not really, you know what I mean? Ugh, okay, I'll go. And so it was literally next door to the store. So you walk outside and walk down the street 30 feet. And during lunch, she explained she had felt so different after our session that she knew she had to come back and thank me for doing something that no one else had been able to do for her. It's funny because that wasn't the first time someone had told me that since working there. And I'll admit, it made me feel special in some way, powerful even. She stated that she wanted to learn from me and, of course, would pay me, but under one condition, which actually caused my stomach to turn. Get ready, because if you haven't read this book and haven't heard this story, you're going to be like, what? Like, what? So there was one condition, okay? And it really did cause my stomach to turn. She explained that her boyfriend was a member of the Armenian mafia that ran many of the businesses in that part of Los Angeles around that time. And she would have to have me, quote unquote, checked out first to make sure I was, quote unquote, okay. My immediate response, I mean, literally, I said it out loud, was something like, "Are you serious? Fuck that." I mean, like straight up, I was like, "Fuck no. Oh, God, no, no, not at all." Like instantaneously, I would like rejected it. And she explained she had no other choice and that he would know even that we had talked that day. I was like, "Hey, look, I'm sorry. That just seems really creepy. I don't know." And it was very much like that. I was just like, "Sorry, no, I just no," and not out of fear, just out of just like, "No, no, no, no. I don't want to meet any of your people. I don't care about your boyfriend. I don't care." It was that was really my attitude at the time. I was like, "I'm not really interested in you. I don't care about your boyfriend. I don't want to teach you anything. It's cool that you bought me some random vegan fried Vietnamese thing, but like I don't think any of this is going to go anywhere." And I feel like she could feel that in my energy, where I was like, "No, no, no, we're good." She explained that she had no other choice, and she mentioned he was going to check me out, and I was like, "Hey, look, it just seems really creepy. I don't know." And she seemed to let it go. but not without a heavy amount of love bombing in the form of telling me how unique and powerful I was, how no one had ever been able to make that original person's energy leave, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, really, she went so deep into like, you're so powerful and you're so this, you know what I mean? Just that whole game of like, you're the best thing ever. And just, oh my God, and I was like, I'll admit I had not, I was naive from the perspective that I had not been love bombed by people like that in public, in the world. Like I was coming from a timeline or a period in my life in which nobody wanted what I had. Nobody wanted me. No one gave a shit about what I was doing. I didn't have any friends. I was 224 fucking pounds and I was sitting in my house playing video games all day, wishing something could change. So I was not accustomed to people doing this to me. You know what I mean? I was like, wow, for the first time. Oh my God, whoa, somebody really wants me. And it was hard. Once again, I'll admit her praise reached me in a way that I wanted to be reached. And it kind of left a hook in me. Luckily, I had already received a text that I had a client waiting for me next door, so our meeting ended very abruptly. It did. They texted me and they were like, "Where the hell are you? What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, sorry, I have to go." And so I just, we just left. And there was nothing bad. It was just, "Oh, I'm sorry, I got to go back to work." Boom. And there was no conclusion to whether or not I was going to teach her anything. It was me going, "Hell no," and like, I don't know. She's trying to convince me to do this. Anyway, getting back to it, what do you think happens next? What do you think happens next? I'm sure you figured it out. Sure enough, just about 1 week later, she appeared again, right around the time I was leaving the shop. It was like literally right as I was getting out and I'm right about to walk to my car. I walk out the door and it's like, boom, she's just there. We didn't even do a reading. She just walked in and asked me to go to coffee with her. I'll pause again to be like, I was like, okay, you know what I mean? It was like squeeze. Okay, yeah, yeah, but I didn't want to. I genuinely did not want to. She asked me to go to coffee with her. She looked like she had been crying, and I should have known there was something highly questionable going on. But to be honest, it had been a hard day there. All I could feel was emptiness and cold inside me, and I welcomed it purely because I didn't want to be alone. I was just like, "All right, sure, I'll talk to you for a while." And it was kind of getting cold outside, just that period of the year where it's like it's already dark and you kind of, you know what I mean? It's like you're over with stuff, but then you're like, "Yeah, I get it. Last time I talked to you, yeah, you sort of made me feel better, even if it was false, even if it was bullshit." So I was like, "Okay, you know, and all I could feel was emptiness and cold inside me. I didn't want to be alone. So we walked up the street to some random coffee shop. For those of you guys that, just in case you ever want to look up, where is this place? Where is this place that he's talking about? What is this place? It's the Los Feliz neighborhood in Greater Los Angeles, and it's on a street specifically. I'll tell you what street it's on. It's on Hillhurst Drive, I think, or Avenue. Um, Hillhurst, yeah. Anyway, so we're walking up Hillhurst to this coffee shop, which I'll even tell you what kind of coffee shop it was. I think it was Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf. It was still when Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf was around, which I hated. It's a horrible place to get coffee. But anyway, we walked up the street to some random coffee shop and she poured her heart out about how she and the mafioso guy had broken up, that he was destroying his life with drugs and alcohol, and she just couldn't take it anymore, that it had somehow ended just after the last time she and I had spoken. But it was okay because, she had seen it coming for months. You know that old story many of us have heard or even told in our own way. "Oh, I just went through a horrible breakup. When was it? Oh, it just happened to be the last time we talked." Oh, interesting. Funny how that must just be a coincidence, right? During that conversation, we eventually ended up. Oh, did I skip something? I might have. Oh no, I didn't. Anyway, sorry. Next paragraph. During that conversation, we eventually ended up on the topic of psychic or spiritual abilities and how to develop them. She had explained she had been a screenwriter and a channeler for many years and had worked with other important people who I had never heard of. She even claimed to have visited John of God in South America, who at the time the world had no idea about, other than him being some kind of amazing mystical healer. You guys remember John of God, how for a period of time before we knew what he was really about, everyone was like, oh, he's a miracle worker. You know what I mean? She went to meet John of God. I think she stayed with them for a while as well, an extended period, who at the time the world had no idea about, other than him being some kind of amazing mystical healer. She even claimed to have previously owned a psychic shop of her own with a storefront in this super expensive neighborhood and wanted to go back into business, which is where I came in, of course. We sat there for what seemed like hours, all the way until the store closed. And at one point, she explained she had an ability similar to what she claimed I was doing, merging with someone's energy body and creating a sort of chemical or even alchemical reaction. I'll pause there to say that I didn't know that's what I was doing. It's not a thought that had came to me. I wasn't like, I'm going to merge with your energy. It was not some decision like, I'm going to merge with your essence and create. It was nothing like that. I never considered any such thing. And I'm not saying it is or isn't true, because what I found out later on, a big part of the clearing process that I engage in does literally involve us placing our consciousness inside another person's body. That's absolutely 100% real. We were doing it this morning. Every living human can develop that ability. Some of us will do very, very well. Some of us will adopt this, get to a surface level of it, just like with, musical instruments and certain types of artwork. Some people, they were able to pick it up and like, oh, I know how to do this instantly. Other people, there's a learning process. We're each different in that way. But she was very adamant at the beginning of this to tell me how, she had the same powers and she could do this and she could do that. And she claimed that she knew that I was merging. I was merging bodies, or something along those lines. For some odd reason, I don't know why. For some odd reason, I asked her to prove it right there on the spot. She looked around as if to see who was watching her, and then leaned forward and looked me in the eyes with an intensity that made me immediately want to turn away. I mean, really. It was like that look where you're like, they're like digging into your energy field with their eyes, just like, and you're like, okay. She said in this creepy, creepy way, you have to let it in. You have to let it in. It was like this sort of almost like sing-songy voice. You just have to let it in this extremely creepy way, drawing out her words and kind of turning her head to the side. I felt a little worried, to be honest, but it was as if she could tell. And she said out loud, relax, I'm not going to hurt you. You have to let it in. Just breathe. It was almost like she got a little annoyed. It was like, relax. I'm not going to hurt you. Like, I'm not going to do anything to you. That sort of feeling. You have to let it in. Just breathe. It was as if a part of me suddenly relaxed, and within seconds I could feel a strange sensation rising underneath my perineum. It was like a twisting, turning energy that slowly worked its way into my body. I could feel some kind of frequency. Get ready. This is triggering to some people. Trigger warning. I could feel some kind of frequency vibrating in my genitalia. And to be completely honest, I began to feel the kind of sensations one begins to feel before they're about to have an orgasm. It was insanely intense, and it frightened me to such an extent that I tensed up and somehow pushed it out immediately. Sure enough, I had almost came right there, and that really freaked me out. For real. I know it's triggering, right? It's like, what? Oh my this is true. This is real life, ladies and gentlemen. This is literally shit that happens to people. And I was sitting there experiencing it going, is this like a movie? What is this? How is this real? How is this thing happen? You know what I mean? You're just sitting there like, there's nothing that can be said. It was insanely intense, and it frightened me to such an extent that I tensed up and somehow pushed it out immediately. Sure enough, I almost came right there, and that really freaked me out. Although there was no erection, it was a biochemical reaction that somehow took place internally, and without the actual act of sexual arousal, purely energetic, one might say, I felt simultaneously sickened, afraid, and aroused all at the same time. There was a palpable danger that attracted me and yet made me feel deeply concerned about what happened or what could happen. And I'm going to pause there to say that, as I go through the stories within this book, you hear this all the time. This was the craziest thing. And then this was the craziest thing. And then, oh my God, that was the biggest thing. That literally, that moment sitting there at the coffee bean and tea leaf, and at the end of 2017, with some bizarre looking woman sitting there, not knowing how I got into this conversation, and then feeling some kind of energy rise up into my body without even a physical reaction. Meaning, I'll just say it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry if this is triggering. Nothing got hard. It was a chemical reaction inside my body that somehow was able to be created through a force of energy that was inserted into me, that I somehow willingly allowed, saying, okay, prove it. Prove it. You're telling me you have some ability. All right, prove it. Kind of sort of like a kid, like, okay, show me, show me. What are you going to do? And after it happened, it was I remember I felt shame. I felt so many feelings. For those of us that have had, non-voluntary experiences such as that, and I'll try to limit the density through which we go through in describing this. But for those of us that have been through trauma in those areas as well, you will know the type of shameful feelings that come upon one. And that's exactly what it was. It was just like, and then again, there was this little thread of something that almost makes you want to go back toward it, which is the craziest part of all, right? It's like, hmm, it's what do you do? And so I must have played it off well, because she didn't seem to be bothered or even noticed that I had rejected her energy. Truth be told, I don't know how I did it, because up until that point in my life, I didn't even know this was something that was possible. It was a form of power I had never experienced. I was reeling in a strange way, and for some reason, she asked if she could try, for some reason, she asked if she could try channeling for me next. It felt like kind of a child's game in which each takes turns trying to impress each other. She wanted to impress me or make me feel something in the way I had apparently done for her, and I agreed to receive a channeling from her right in that moment. Fortunately, though, the coffee shop was closing, however, so we went outside and sat on a bench on the sidewalk, literally just right out on the curb, you know what I mean? Just off of Hillhurst Drive, behind the coffee tea, bean leaf, whatever coffee shop, in the parking lot of the Ralph's that's literally right there. It's still there now, across the street from Lassen's, the grocery store. I mean, it's a real place. You can go there. And I'm sitting there on this bench, and we're doing this game, this child's game of like, I'll do something. I'm gonna impress you. And so the coffee shop was closing. We went outside and sat on this bench, and it seemed weird to be doing this out in public. And she said something like, okay, I'm going to bring her in. Don't be afraid. She even had a little bit of an accent, which is, it's dumb to try to mimic it, but it was like, don't be afraid. And I was like, what? You know what I mean? Don't be afraid. Okay. I sat there in silence for a few moments, just waiting. And then she said, okay, she's here. What she said after that really affected me. It was the first time I had heard such things in this life. She explained that she and I had worked together in a past life during the fall of one of many eras that took place during the time of ancient Egypt. She explained that we had been oracles and great teachers, and that I had risen to a very high stature in that society for my abilities in healing and divination, much like what I was doing now, which is what had reinitiated our connection in this life. She explained we had been initiates of a spiritual order that was led by a being, get ready for this, guys, that was led by a being known as the Goat of Mendes, which for those who do not know is commonly known as Baphomet, or what some even call the Great Horned God. For those who don't know, yeah, that's the devilish image in the tarot cards, the goat-headed guy, the androgynous Baphomet symbol. She explained that we had been part of a spiritual order that was led by the embodiment of that being, which at the time had been seen at that time on earth, mind you, had been seen as something holy and upright, one of the highest forms of spiritual advancement, and one whose energy was sought after by people from all over the world, from all over the known world during that era for a variety of reasons. Very unlike its negative and presumably satanic nature in our modern society. I would say Baphomet itself was less satanic and purely Luciferian energy. If you want to get more into the specifics around it, it's it's the symbol of Luciferian energy. And so we had been involved in some form of a spiritual order. There was so much more that she had told me on that, but let me get back into the text here. She claimed that I had been a priest and a leader of that order, and she had been what she called one of the moon priestesses. She told a story of how we had done great work and created many changes in people's understanding of mysticism, healing, sexual energy, alchemy, and magic, amongst all kinds of other things I cannot remember now. She claimed that I had been resented by the people who were in command of those orders and betrayed during a great cataclysm by being left behind during a mass exodus, sacrificed, so to speak, as one who would be forced to pay some kind of retribution for what had been done wrong by others. Upon hearing those words, my body reacted in a way I couldn't understand. I felt it. I could see it. I could even see her and hordes of people coming after us, having to flee across vast deserts and lands only to end up in a strange hidden tribal village in what would now be the Middle East, where I willingly turned to dark magic in order to create safety and survivability in an area where I had lived long enough to turn from a hero into the villain, all at the mercy of others who we had come to trust with our entire lives. That was not all. She claimed I had certain abilities that were yet to come to fruition in my body, and that by working with her, ready? By working with her, I would be able to reawaken those abilities once again for whatever purpose I chose. She claimed that one thing I had used and taught others to do in that life was to create a beam of light from the eyes, in this case, a red light. That light had an ability to cure disease or create it. She claimed that I had an uncommon ability to manifest energies, events, possessions, or anything I could imagine by creating webs of light with my body and breath, and could cast them throughout an environment like a literal fishnet, gathering and absorbing energy that we would use in whatever way we desired. There was a lot more information that came along with that, but in truth, I do not remember now. Only certain things stuck with me, and I now know it was because in many ways they were truths that I was just coming into realization about, and had been and still were literally real and very possible in my life. After a time, we eventually ended our conversation with an agreement to meet again soon. No concrete plans were made, and I was definitely reeling from it all. You know what I mean? Where you're just like, what just happened? You know what I mean? Like you trying to wrap your head around this experience. She also seemed to become extremely detached and sullen after the channeling. And we ended up casually just ending our talk for the moment. And that's important to mention as I end that paragraph. It was like after that moment of kind of channeling on that bench, out there, it was like I could see that something had fully exhausted itself inside her. I mean, to the extent where it was just like, I have to go, like I have to go now type thing. And it's like, okay, all right, cool. Cause I was like both really like in some ways impressed. I was in some ways I was like scared. I was still dealing with the, like literally 15, 20 minutes earlier, there was this crazy wave of energy that rolled through my body. And I'm sitting there like, okay, yeah, we'll just meet again. You know what I mean? And yeah, she just walked away. I walked away, got in my car, drove back, wherever I was staying, which was at my sister's house at that time in my life. This was the last I heard of her for nearly a month. After our meeting, I spent some time talking to a couple friends about it all, and the reactions I got were concerning, to say the least. I've never been a proponent of Baphomet energy in this life, and it was something that I really didn't feel appropriate to get involved with or talk about publicly. I wasn't concerned about whether or not it was a satanic energy. It just felt negative and dark and a little frightening in a way. Honestly, the feeling that I got from it was dirty. It was like this dirty, sort of like shameful kind of like, and I don't know if those were my feelings. I don't know if those feelings that was coming from it. It was just like after that, me putting my mind upon that image when she had mentioned, the goat of Mendez and all of these things. And I didn't even know what it was. I found out what the goat of Mendez was from listening to her channeling, and I went and looked it up. You guys can look it up right now if you choose. And it was a thing that it was scary to me. It was not cool. You know what I mean? I was like, whoa, no, hell no. You know what I mean? It was not something that I wanted to hang out with in really any way. You know, I knew somehow it was not. I'm getting, as I get back to the text, let me say this all over again. I knew somehow it was not a force I needed to connect with in this life, but I was able to recognize it as something very real. To make it weirder, a form of Baphomet's energy, a white one to be exact, kept walking into my dreams for a couple weeks after that. I'd like to correct that statement and say, honestly, for like a month, maybe more, even after my experience with her, I remember encountering it once again as if I was walking through a crowd in a dream and I was like, and I just kept going, you know what I mean? And you're like, oh shit, you know what I mean? You just keep going type of a thing. And it was just, it kept showing up, man. And that, I want to be real with you guys. It was just very uncomfortable. It was a thing that I couldn't really talk about with people because as soon as you start talking about it with people, they go into this sort of like, oh, that's so evil and satanic. You're connected with it. Oh my God. They jump to these conclusions. And there was very few people in my life that I could just have a talk with and be like, hey, check it out. Here's what happened. This is what went down. Here's what they said. This is, on and try to like pick it apart with somebody. There was really nobody at that time that I could do that with. And so, it was coming into my dreams, sort of stalking me, we could say. One day in particular, I had been wandering about the neighborhood near the shop and turned to look into the window of a t-shirt shop. And I was stopped dead in my tracks when I noticed a huge white Baphomet image in the reflection of the glass. Actually made me physically shudder. And I walked over to the door to see if somehow a statue or maybe a poster inside. Of course, it wasn't. It was just a t-shirt store. The shock of that was kind of a turning point in which I realized I needed to do something, either banish or clear this energy. It didn't feel attached to me, but it was something hanging around. I didn't want any part of it. It felt like something trying to worm its way into my life by showing itself to me over and over. I felt a strange mix of disgust, avoidance, and honor. To be honest, just to be noticed by a being such as that. Very conflicting feelings, to say the least, right? In actuality, that moment was somehow the last time I ever encountered its energy. And I also want to, I've already corrected that, but it did, to be really honest, like I said, I had a dream where I was like in a crowd with it. I think there might have been another time. I mean, damn, that was like 7 years ago now. Anyway, or no, 9. Whoa. 9, literally 9 years ago. 9 years ago at the end of this year. So anyway, a part of me wonders if it felt my rejection and backed off in a sense, because after that it passed from my mind for quite some time. And I can say at that stage it did. At that time in the chapter in which I was, connecting with her and during my work after the day that I saw it in the reflection. And that honestly was one of those moments that really put like a deep fear in my body, to be looking at something in a reflection. And then to all of a sudden, it was just to my right as I was looking to my, you look and you're like, whoa, what? It like just huge, like from the floor to the ceiling, like a white statue of Baphomet. I remember just like, oh shit, and going and looking and seeing if it was real, and it wasn't. But that was definitely a turning point. Something was not right. um Anyway, it passed from my mind for quite some time. I'm going to pause here to check if anyone has any questions. I have not been looking at the chat. I want to apologize because we have a bit more to go into. Anyway, thanks for hanging out, everybody. Like I said, everybody in the world's online right now. So if you're one of the few people that are here, thank you for joining us. But okay, I don't see any questions. We're going to get back to it. Sorry if this is triggering for some of you guys, but it is what it is. Okay. So after that, that was kind of the end of the Baphomet thing. Didn't really show up for a while. I feel like that stage was over. And so while that passed from my mind, of course, Amanda didn't. And she rapidly reappeared in the coming week, this time via text message. I should have known something was up when she asked to take me to some ultra expensive Indian restaurant, which was funny because the food was honestly ridiculously bad. I would even say, honestly, the food we had there was literally cold. It was so weird. One of the weirdest restaurants I've ever been to is somewhere in this super nice part of like Beverly Hills. And it was an Indian restaurant up on the upper floors of this really tall building. So, well, there's not that many tall buildings in Beverly Hills, but just one of the larger buildings around there in that region. There, it was like right up at the top of it, and you have to go up this elevator and walk around this thing, and there's this huge walkway to get to it. It was just like it was almost hidden. It was like a hidden restaurant. Like if you were on the street, you will have absolutely no idea that this place was there. Only if you had been in this building or if you knew it. It was like way up on the top floor. And so anyway, let's get back to it here before I get lost in the commentary. So we went to this Indian restaurant, which was funny because the food was ridiculously bad. It was very cold. It's really strange. Regardless, I could tell she was trying to wine and dine me somehow. It was odd though, because she seemed sick and in need of something. And I could not tell what this was at this time. This is how naive I was, ladies and gentlemen. And granted, it makes sense because it was the first time I had experienced such an energy, but it's like I could feel it within her. It was like worn down and just like empty and like hollow of sorts. And I remember sitting there with her, and it was like she wouldn't eat, and she was like waiting for me to eat. And I was like, I was like, it's kind of cold, right? She's like, "Huh," just sort of like waving it off, like, I don't care, type of a thing. If I had had more self-awareness in that moment, I probably would have been able to tell a lot more about what was going on, but, I was very, very caught up in we could say the newness of it. And so it was odd because she seemed sick and in need of something, sort of clingy in a way, which kind of put me off, but also seemed oddly alluring in a way that sickens me now. Once again, there were these odd moments in which she would seem charismatic, youthful, even sexy in a way that I had not previously been attracted to. In fact, I still cannot see how I would have ever been naturally attracted to a person like that because of how fundamentally different we were. And also, despite being only 5 or 6 years older than me, she seemed to be in such a different, highly placed area of society that it seemed ridiculous in a way that we would ever even be in contact. She also had a tendency to say really bizarre things in a way that kind of threw me off. Things like, look at that man over there. You're so much more powerful than him. Do you want to be like him? No, you don't. You're you. You have real power. That can't be bought. Now, that's a disjointed sentence, right? It sounds weird the way that I'm saying it, right? That's how this woman would talk. It was like, do you see this? Da 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 da. Well, da 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 da. And this is that. And no, 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 no. Therefore, you are boom. And it was like these declarations of like observation, observation. You're better than that. Accept it, type of a thing. And it was weird because at the time, I wasn't equipped in the energy of the moment to realize that it was a form of manipulation that it was being placed upon me. And I sat there at this table with this woman, and she looked around the room and she would point to people just like this moment and be like, you're better than them. You're better than them. And I was like, okay, I'll be real, I felt a little bit like a little kid at times, I was like, "Okay, uh-huh," just like, "Yeah, if you say so," type of thing, which very, very, very new for me, and it was like she actively compared my energy to everyone she would see and always referenced something about differences in power or ability. It seemed oddly parasitic and gross in how she compared everything, but somehow I felt myself becoming willing to entertain it all. It was a little like a scene in a movie, to be honest, where some poor kid with raw potential got to have a tour of the dark underbelly of a cult elitist spirituality. She drove me around LA and told me stories of the secret societies and sex clubs that were so deeply interwoven into certain communities that they had even spray painted sigils and symbols on the pavement in front of certain businesses to signal that they were friendly to those groups of people. And I will pause there to say, this is absolutely 100% true. And I can take you to these places in Los Angeles and I can show you literally the symbols that are painted on the sidewalk. I can show you those symbols granted, it's not like we can go prove it in the moment, but I'm assuming they're still there. They were there for the entirety of the time that I was living in Los Angeles. And I even saw these symbols in other places, not knowing what they were, thinking that it was some kind of urban art project where people like spray paint some shit on the sidewalk. I did not know what it was, but she would drive me around and we would look at stuff and it was like she was giving me a tour of something, going, see, look at that, look at that, look at that. This means this, that means that. I'll be very specific. There was one symbol that she showed me that we saw 3 or 4 times, and she mentioned something about how a bunch of really, like, people from Hollywood were in it, and she mentioned I think she mentioned, I don't know if it's Bill Maher, but it might be Bill Maher. I'm not sure if you guys know who Bill Maher is, but I think it was Bill Maher that she was talking about because his name came up in some other conversations as being somewhat of a kind of a like an initiator for some aspect of their blood cult. But I don't know that it was him that was involved in the symbolic stuff. It was just she was telling me the type of people that were there. And in the midst of it, his name came up. Uh one of the actors from Friends, she mentioned, and I don't know which one it was. I promise you, I do not know. One of the actors from Friends was also a part of it. I'm trying to find other anyway, it does not matter, but it was fascinating. It was crazy. These sort of sigils are painted in certain areas, and they're meant to be symbols that show you that you're whatever it is you're involved with, that's an okay place for you. You're welcome there, or that the owners of that business are friendly with that cult or group or whatever it was type of a thing. And so yeah, it was really, really wild. So there I was, like some poor kid, getting shown around all this wild stuff. She drove me around LA, talked about sex clubs and all this stuff, and they had spray painted sigils and symbols on the pavement to signal they were friendly to those groups of people. It should be stated that during this entire experience, I had no idea who or what she truly was. It became painfully obvious there was something so different about her, but also sick and depleted. She claimed to be a director of an important fashion design school and had even been a screenwriter who had worked on a number of TV shows in years past. It took another week or so of dinners, her meeting me for lunch, drives around town, and even up the California coastline before she invited me to her house. In hindsight, if there was ever a grooming process, this was it. This was it. I was getting groomed. It was a weekend afternoon and kind of rainy. I don't even remember why we went to her house, but up until that point, I still had not seriously considered there was some kind of romantic thing going on. It sucks to say, you guys, that I was almost willingly this naive at that stage. Like I said earlier, it was like maybe I had been blessed, maybe I had been cursed, maybe I was just crazy. It was a stage of my life where it's like I was just dumbed down within that realm. It was like maybe they were doing for me what I couldn't do for myself, and they were like, "We're going to turn this force inside you down so that you can focus on these other things." Because up until that day, I remember every time she would call me or text me, I'd be like, "Yeah, sure," because I had nothing else to do, nowhere else to go at that time. And I just kind of went along with it. Nothing had been asked of me yet. No one had made any moves. It was almost like, in this weird way, and this sounds fanciful and stupid to some of you guys, but it was like I was a living investigation. I got to live this investigation cycle of spending time and learning about all these weird dark things and hearing it, and it was fascinating. It was kind of scary. It was a little weird. It was one of those things where, like, for those of us that have ever been involved in drugs in this life, that feeling when you first start doing drugs and you're like, wow, and it's secret and it's so awesome and you can't tell anyone, and it's all I want to do type of a thing. And it's like, that's what it was becoming. There was like a drug effect with it. And so I was like, yeah, I'll go to your house. Sure. Yeah, why not? Still not realizing what exactly was happening. And I do want to let you guys know that this person is still alive. They're still out there. This is not their real name. They may have found this. I don't know if they even care that I wrote this story about them. I don't know if they even know. They may know. They might not know. They might not care. You know what I mean? Might not even be alive. My guess is she is, and she's still out there. And who knows? Who knows? We'll hear more about it as we go along. But this person is still out there. Absolutely. I doubt they live in the place where they live now, but I can take you to their front door if you want. You know what I mean? Well, actually, you can't. You can't enter the building. Anyway, she lived in one of those high-rise condo buildings that litter LA. Ultra nice, somehow outdated in a way, yet still in the $10,000 a month and up price range, no doubt. To tell the truth, I was taken aback by how well she seemed to be doing, and I have to admit, it was a little intimidating. Upon entering her apartment, I noticed that one entire wall had been covered with black and white headshots of men. Certain actors I recognized, but whose names I didn't know, and just a number of people that she had placed notes and written little phrases under their images. It was almost like that entire wall was an altar of sorts. She explained that some of them were men she had been with, because here's the thing. I was kind of a dumbass. I walked in her house and I was like, "Whoa, what's that?" Just I was just being a silly kid, just joking around, like, "Damn, man, are these all your boyfriends?" I would just make jokes like that. You know what I mean? Which I still do. You guys have heard me. You know what I mean? A lot of irreverent kind of sarcasm. I was like, "Oh, damn, those are all your ex-boyfriends." And she explained some of them were men she had been with, some of them were characters from scripts she had been working on, and there were many others that I never asked about. One of the guys that she had on her wall was the old man from the show. Oh God, what the Fringe. There was an old dude on the television show Fringe. She had his picture on her wall. A bunch of other people. One of the actors from the early 2000s Saturday Night Live. I almost want to say it could have been Colin Farrell, but I don't. It's like I can't remember I don't know their names. You know what I mean? I was so out of touch with that. I was just like, "Whoa, I know those faces. I could see that." No females whatsoever. It was all men on her wall. Very strange, by the way. Yeah, but if you were to look at it from the perspective of I'm a screenwriter, I write scripts. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, these are headshots of, yeah, right, actors that maybe you've worked with them, right. These are people that are part of your world, maybe. So maybe that I didn't know what to think about it really, but it was kind of like the whole wall was sort of an altar. A few moments later, things got really weird for the first time since that meeting at the coffee shop. It's hard to talk about it, to be honest. She had gone out into the other room and changed clothes into some unremarkable outfit. It almost seemed like hospital scrubs or pajamas. She said, "Come over here. Look at me. I want you to look me in the eyes." And walked over to me, taking both my hands in hers. She began to say something about how I was one of the most unique and powerful men she had ever met, that I had somehow done something that no one else could ever do for her. There was that word again, power. It was like a need she had to prove that to me in a way that caused me to feel a little sick. She then explained that She had a very different type of energy, and that many men couldn't handle her. She said, seriously, you guys, literally, this is what this woman told me. Bring the Bible out so I can put my hands on it type of situation, okay? She said that every man she had ever been with had been destroyed by this energy. And she even went into detail about people she had been with and how things always fell apart in their lives after meeting her. In my head, I was wildly questioning this entire encounter. What was I doing with this person? Who was she? Her manner of communication was so strangely formal and archaic in a sense. It was like a warning and an invitation somehow. There were so many declarations and statements of power or intent that really intrigued me, but also made me feel legitimately sick for some reason I didn't understand. We stood there in the living room of her apartment with our hands joined, and for the first time since that initial coffee shop encounter, she turned her head and looked at me with this force of energy that shot into me like an injection running straight up my spine. It was one of the most intoxicatingly sexual energies I had ever experienced. It overtook me in a way that once again frightened me deeply, but was so intense I could not control it. We spent what felt like the next few hours writhing in some strange sexual entanglement on the couch in her apartment, fully clothed the entire time, but completely overtaken by some kind of animalistic, primal, sexual transference of lust of a kind I had never known existed. We never even completely took our clothes off, and no type of penetration even occurred. It was entirely energetic and so powerful, it seemed like an involuntary experience that I had no power or control over, which is very important to mention because in looking back at that stage, I don't think that it was that I was powerless. It was that I chose to give my power over to whatever it was in that moment. And as a result of that, I had this type of an experience. But within the midst of it, it was like I knew that I was just doing things that were against my, you know what I mean? It was not me in a sense, but it was me. Which is very, very, very strange to kind of wrap your head around. I'm going to get to your questions and comments in a minute. During this experience, she would whisper things in my ear and tell me of things she wanted to do with me, how we would manifest houses and properties, and I would become who I was meant to be in this life. Her eyes seemed to physically light up in a haunting manner at times, and there were moments in which I could feel my energy literally leaving my body and rising up into this area up above us where I could look down on what I was doing while also experiencing it. It was beyond anything I had ever experienced, equal parts frightening, alluring, overwhelmingly sexual, and strangely narcotic. In hearing myself recount this experience now, it seems like such an extremely dark and disturbing thing, right? Like as you guys are hearing it, it's like, oh God, really, really, you know what I mean? Hearing it now and looking back on it and retelling the story, it's like, oh my God. I mean, almost like I was being seduced by the dark side of the force, so to speak. This lasted for a few hours straight, and by the time I left her apartment, it was well past midnight. In fact, it was like at some point, a certain drug had run out. We suddenly returned back to normal, and she sort of kicked me out of her apartment in this kind of abrupt way. I mean, literally, it was like at some point, switch, boom, normal again. Okay, I'll see you later. I'm tired. I want to go to bed. And I was like, okay, I'll leave. You know, just boom, walk out the door, not even thinking anything. Just like, okay, you know, really weird. After that experience on the couch, I was deeply shaken. I mean, seriously. In fact, before we go forward into this next paragraph, I'll check your comments. It was a wild one. White Swan Way Shower, thank you for this question. Hey, oh, sorry, this was to Aurora. I'm all pulling. I thought it was a question. I saw question marks. Do you remember the astral experience where I got to spy on the succubus and she had male lieutenants I can harvest sex energy through? Boom. I actually don't know that story, White Swan, but that sounds that's very much what it was. Very, very, very much what it was. Cat L says, "Yep, they have to tell you who they are." No, she did. I remember that day. She told me exactly who she was. She had been linked with people in bands that I know. Well, I'm gonna get to this later. I mean, even people whose bands that I had followed at an earlier stage of my life. It was bizarre, man. So many people. Anyway, it was crazy. And so I don't see any questions in there, but Missing Time says, "Why do you think vampires don't like garlic?" I don't know. I'm hoping that's a joke because she didn't care about garlic, or that was never that was never an aspect of our discussion at the time. And so, anyway, okay, cool. Yep, red shoes. You know it. And so, anyway, we're gonna get back into it. Here we go. We're gonna go back into the next paragraph. Okay, boom. Moving on. So we had just gone through this crazy experience. It was like the most wildly bizarre form of sexual transference, non-physical energy. You know what I mean? It was mind blowing, and I can't say in the best way. I can't say in the worst way. It was a completely new experience for me. I was not equipped to really understand everything that was going on. After that experience on the couch, I was deeply shaken. I didn't hear from her for the next day or so, which was kind of welcome in a way. Upon returning to my shift at Liberation the next day, that's the store I was working at. It's actually called Liberate, but at Liberation the next day, I was greeted. This is a very interesting point, everybody. I was greeted with intense disdain by my coworkers. There was a crew of millennial age young women who worked there who had seemed both intrigued by me and also afraid at the same time. And the first time I walked in the door after that night at Amanda's house, one of the girls up front said, "What happened? You look like shit." She even had this look of anger or disgust on her face that I had never seen before. In fact, they all seemed immediately triggered by me somehow. Keep in mind, there was no way they could know where I had been the night before. There was not a single person in the world that could have known that yet. And it was like some kind of energy had marked me or came with me after that. I noticed over the entire time I knew Amanda, that was an effect her energy had on me. It caused every single woman I would encounter to be triggered or uncomfortable around me in some way that was way too obvious. To be honest, I didn't even notice this at first until a few days went by, and I realized that everyone had gotten really weird with me when we had been much closer only days prior, often eating together, hanging out, general coworker, social interaction, nothing that involved. Like we would have lunch all the time, just how it is when you have general social cohesion with people at work. You're like, yeah, you want to get a burger? Okay, I'll get tacos. Yeah, whatever, just dumb shit like that, right? And all of a sudden, it was like I came back that day and everyone was like, ugh. God, what? It was like it was weird, man. It tripped me out, dude. It was very much that was one of the first moments where I was like, something happened. Something is different. Something is wrong. It took a little while to figure that out. Eventually you'll face it, you know what I mean? It was as if I had been marked by that experience, and I could not deny it. I must admit I did feel unusually depleted after that initial encounter. Felt very much like coming down after being on some sort of stimulant drug like Adderall or other forms of pharmaceutical amphetamines. Bunch of people in the chat know what that feels like. You know you do. Don't act like you don't. You know you do. Yeah. Of course, I did the least sane thing possible, and within 2 days was summoned back to her apartment for yet another strange, voluntary, yet also somehow involuntary sexual entanglement energy transfer experience. I call it that now because that's quite literally what it was. She would look me in the eyes to initiate some kind of contact, and I would willingly allow it to take place, all the while having her whisper things in my ear repeatedly, like a series of trigger phrases or commands. A day later, on the third time we engaged in this bizarre sexual transference, she paused at one point and abruptly asked me to do some kind of ritual with her. This is where it gets really weird again, everybody. If it's not already getting a little bizarre and uncomfortable, this is where it gets even weirder. Once again, I mean, it's like, I don't know why I feel I need to say this, but I do. This is literally what happened to me. And it sounds crazy. It sounds impossible. It sounds like a stupid movie. It sounds like a script that this woman was writing. And I think that's one of the difficulties I had being within the so-called disclosure starseed SSP community was that the stories that get told around black magic and the transfer of energy and all those things are the ones I was hearing from people at that time felt like this, like they were telling stories from a child's TV show or some video game. And it was like there was just this surface level thing going on. And then I was like, whoa. And then here I was experiencing a completely different version of what everyone had talked about in ways that everyone said was impossible and wasn't real and it's this or that. And I was like, but it is. I'm having the experience. And I can't say that I was coming to that conclusion with a sense of pride or anything, but it was just I noticed that once again, the experiences I was having were shockingly different from everyone I knew at the time that was claiming to be going through the same things. And I think on some level, it made me doubt myself. It made me go, well, that's probably, maybe it's not real, Matt. Maybe it's just your mind. Maybe that's not actually happening because it was like, I was almost like I had been in a social group that was so distorted, and they still are to this very day. To this very day, the majority of these people are some of the most delusional individuals you're going to come across in a spiritual community. I say that with respect as a very delusional person in my own right. Okay. Seriously. You know what I mean? So that's not, I'm not separate from that. I think one of the first things I learned in doing this work, one of the things that Britain had told me was that every single professional psychic or intuitive at some point will fall prey to their own delusion. It's a factor, or rather a fact of life for those of us that do intuitive work. Not to say that it happens to all of us all the time, but the time will come. And I think that I had been heavily programmed with that. And I was like, well, maybe I'm just delusional about this whole thing. And maybe it's just a completely normal sort of just a very new level of, energy that I'm experiencing. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe I should allow myself to, you know what I mean? I was going through a lot of mental kind of wrangling around how to make this thing okay and how to like understand it and how to like, engage in a way that it was hard. It was very, very hard to do. And so the day came, or a day later, on the third time we engaged in this bizarre sexual transference, she paused at one point and abruptly asked me to do some kind of ritual with her. It was a very sudden thing to hear when only seconds before this woman was moaning in some kind of intense sexual ecstasy. And then a moment later, she was completely present and asking to perform a ritual. It was almost as if some kind of critical mass of energy had been reached, and she wanted to make use of something. She pulled out her phone and showed me a house that had been designed by the architect Frank Lloyd Wright, and told me how we could manifest this house into our life by doing certain things. Seriously, talk about unexpected, right? You're sitting here, sorry to make it sound like this, but you're making out with this person in some form of like bizarrely, probably unsafe and really potentially negative type of, sexual energetic moment. And, all of a sudden it's like, boom, I would like to do a ritual. Let me show you this image on my phone. And she showed me the house. Here's what's crazy. You can look it up, and it's a real place. And it sounds so stupid to think that this person somehow thought that she and I could manifest this house into her life. But if you want to look it up, it's called Ennis House. Ennis House, Ennis, Ennis House in Los Angeles. You can go look it up right now. It was used partially in one of the scenes in the movie Blade Runner. Blade Runner had a scene, I think, in Ennis House, or they used some of the designs from Ennis House and put it into the set of Blade Runner. Even if Blade Runner didn't have a scene filmed there was a design aesthetic that was brought in from that, whatever that property was. And so, all of a sudden, now I'm looking at this picture of a house and suddenly we're going to manifest this house. I was kind of annoyed in a way. It felt weird to suddenly shift from this intense high of altered sexual stimulation into suddenly trying to manifest a seemingly impossible mansion that she had already chosen prior to this moment. I mean, literally, she had this shit like literally screenshot on her phone, like boom. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, you had that ready. You were waiting for that one. You know what I mean? It's crazy to think that I was, within that moment. And so I felt kind of annoyed in a way. It was like, all of a sudden this picture comes out. It felt weird to suddenly shift from this intense high of altered sexual stimulation into suddenly trying to manifest a seemingly impossible mansion that she had chosen prior to this moment. I had already known deep inside something was very wrong here, but I was willing to engage out of sheer thrill and bizarreness of it all. Plus, once you begin to engage with those type of energies willingly, they have an effect on our emotions, thought forms, urges, and so much more. I had opened the door and willingly gone into it. And now here we were about to engage in some kind of ritual. And it really was. It was like one of those times in your life where you're like, you shouldn't go in there. Don't go in there. If you know what will happen if you go in there. Oh, maybe I'll go in there. I'll just see what it's like. Went into it and it certainly got weird, but let's keep going. I had opened the door and willingly gone into it. And now here we were about to engage in some kind of ritual. Her method was nothing like I had expected. She wanted to do, get this, you guys, she wanted to do a meditation together that took two people to make it work. I realized that was a big part why I had been brought to that experience. I was a source of energy needed to manifest something in her life. Her technique was to meditate upon the heart chakra until we were able to create a green light between us. She then wanted me to cast a web of energy out of my body into her and up against the wall, similarly to how she had arranged that wall of photos on the other side of the room. She would then send her energy into the web I created and claimed that together we would cast the green light into the web and send it out into the world so that it would gather the energy needed toward her for the purpose of manifestation. I felt annoyed and a bit angry, but I was also curious. I had never engaged in a meditation like that where two people would share energy and manifest something astrally, and I confessed I didn't know how or if I could do it. This admission had an unfortunate effect of causing her to become visibly annoyed as well. And I should have changed that sentence to say it was like in a split second she got pissed off and she was like, like instant, like a switch flicked, and it was like, you have so much power and you're so afraid you won't do anything with it. I need someone who's for real, someone who isn't afraid. Are you afraid? You're not afraid. Just do it. It was like this burst of like, come on, what's wrong with you? Type of like, okay, which if you envision yourself in that situation going through this wildly sexual thing, and then all of a sudden the switch flicks and now we're going to manifest a house, and it's like, what? I don't know how. Shut up and do it, and it's like, okay, and the reality is I was willing to do it. But let's get back to the text. The way she repeated words like afraid and power seemed so odd to me. There was so much emphasis behind them. It was my first time witnessing how people could literally cast energy upon you with the right words used in the right ways at the right times, and it worked just as she had intended. I sucked it up and immediately said something like, yeah, fuck it, let's do it. I mean, honestly, that's literally what I said. But anyway, we began a few moments later, and she guided me through a visualization process with her sitting across from me in this sort of strange embrace where we were facing each other, nearly touching noses. I must admit, I felt literally nothing at that moment. Seriously, literally nothing. It was like everything went dry and blank. Well, which is what I'm about to say again. It's like I went completely blank and just dissociated from the entire ritual meditation. I heard her voice change in a strange way, growing oddly deeper as she spoke and guided me through the process. But I had completely deactivated something within myself and merely went through the motions, literally pretending the whole time. Do you feel it? Yes. Do you see the web? Yes. Okay, now send it in to me. But the truth is, it wasn't there. I didn't see it. I had no idea how to even send it into her to begin with. Seriously. It was like at that point, I was just in me, just regular me going, oh God, what the hell's going on here? You know what I mean? And like, do you see it? Yes. Just going along for the ride. I was completely out of my league. It was like I had completely blanked out and I could feel a kind of desperation rising within me. I wish I could say what happened here, but I completely dissociated from my body. And the next thing I was able to grab onto, she was going to take a shower and wanted to eat. It was like a wave had passed and someone had gotten what they wanted. Honestly, a part of me still wonders what actually happened in that lost space of time. I returned home that night and knew with absolute certainty that I bit off more than I could chew. I felt strange and weak, like I had in the days of extreme addiction. All I could do is sit in my car and blankly smoke weed, just trying to dissociate from it all. And that's literally what I did. That night, I drove back to my sister's house and I sat in the car across the street and I just sat there, like literally just smoking weed all like for hours, just determinedly, like, just trying, that when you're like, I'm trying to make sense and I'm trying to forget and I'm trying to understand all at the same time. And I can tell you exactly what I did. I left there. I went to Jack in the Box and I bought a breakfast croissant at like literally 11 o'clock at night. Cause they'll sell you breakfast. And so I had this greased out, fast food greasy sandwich next to me on the seat in this car, and I'm sitting here smoking weed. And I'm going to mention a thing that happened to me in that moment that's not in the book, right? And I was sitting there, and all of a sudden, this super, super bright light came into the side of my window, and it was like so bright. I was like, "What?" And what it was a cop car had pulled up to the side of me, and they shined their flashlight in my window, and they were looking at me, and I was like, "Oh, fuck! Like I'm busted. I'm in trouble. I'm literally holding a pipe in my hand." And they're like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I live right here." And they were like, "Okay." And they just drove off. And I was like, "What?" But then again, see, the thing is, weed's legal in California, so they weren't going to do anything anyway. I wasn't thinking that at the time, but it was weird. I was sitting there after this experience, so just out of my mind, like, that I didn't even realize their car had pulled up. And the only way I knew they were there is because they shone their flashlight right on me, sitting in my car, looking at me sitting there, and they're just like, "Are you okay? All right, go." They just drove off. And I was like, whoa, okay. All I could do was sit in my car and blankly smoke weed, just trying to dissociate from it all. The very next day was a rare day off for me, and despite reeling from the previous night's experience, I awoke feeling a deep need to see Amanda again. I couldn't explain why. It was as if she knew immediately, as within minutes of me waking up, she began texting me saying, "I need you. Please come over now. I need you." Once again, with a strange process of repetition in her words. Of course, that day we engaged in the same act, only without the ritual aspects. I could tell something within her was spiraling. There was a faint wave of anger or resentment in her face as I arrived, but also this wild lust that immediately kicked in. Only this time she became aggressive and angry. It was like some kind of pressurization was occurring within her, and I could feel something about to burst. And I'm just going to be real about this. I don't know if it's too graphic for some of you guys, but it was as if this person was literally grabbing onto me, like grabbing in this way where I'm like, whoa, this is a little bit too far now. Okay, there's something, you know what I mean, where you start to recognize very, very strange energy. And so, um, where are we? Sorry. Of course, that day we engaged in the same act, only without the ritual aspects. I'll skip forward just a little bit. Only this time she became aggressive and angry. It was like some kind of pressurization was occurring in her, and I could feel something about to burst. We're going to go through the next couple of paragraphs, and then I'll pause for any questions. If you have them, you can reassert them in down at the bottom of the chat. After more than an hour locked into this insane wave of sexual entanglement, she suddenly wanted to show me a vacant storefront she claimed she was going to rent as a psychic shop business she wished to create with me. And so I'm going to pause there again. It was just like the previous time where like you're going through this passionate moment with someone, and then now I want you to do this. It was like boom, snap, back to normal. Now we're going to go on a ride. I'm going to show you a store, and I'm going to rent this store, and we're going to open a business there. And I was just like, really? All right, whatever. I was feeling, this same feeling of like just kind of annoyance, kind of tension, also weird desire, weird addictive kind of lust sensations going on. And so she claimed she was going to rent a psychic shop business she wished to create with me. I agreed, and as we left her building, walking out onto the street, she suddenly freaked out in this theatrically overblown manner. Oh my God, that's his car. He's here. We have to go now. I mean, it was like this lady like went into absolute like overblown terror of like, like a big expression, totally overdone, just like total Hollywood, like, oh my God, that's his car. We have to go. We have to go. And she was like literally pulling me, we have to go. And I was shocked. Who? Well, the mafioso ex-boyfriend, of course. Or was he actually her ex? She was visibly shaking while pointing at this empty Mercedes convertible across the street. We have to go. You don't get it. He'll kill us both. To be honest, I didn't believe it. And somehow I didn't even care that it was his car. And I'll pause there again to say, like, I was like, what? Are you serious? Come on. Let's just, I was like, it's okay. You know what I mean? I was trying to play it off. Like, there's nobody around. Let's just go. And it was like, he'll kill us, one of those moments. And you're like, okay, all right, well, we can, we can take my car instead type of a moment. But she began nearly running around the corner to her car without me. And I awkwardly followed, trying to console her in some way while also being completely disturbed by the whole display. We ended up skipping the entire storefront tour and ended up driving way up the coast to somewhere past Laguna Beach on that long, winding, famous California highway. The one that's now all burnt up, right? It's not even there. Or the places that used to be along there are gone. But during this trip, she began to confide in me a number of strange things. It was like she needed to confess in a way. And I will pause there to see if there's any questions. Empty or invisible. Yeah, exactly. That's what it was. I'm missing time is like, not okay, officer. I need a lighter. You know what's crazy? Missing time. Based on that situation, if that cop wanted to, they could have popped me for a DUI because I was in the driver's seat. For real. If you're in the driver's seat, I don't know if it's like that in every state, but if you're in the driver's seat of a car and you're doing something, they can instantly pop you for DUI. But they didn't. They were just like, "Are you okay?" And they just kept going. I'm like, oh, I guess we're cool, you know? Um, anyway, let's see. Any questions? She certainly taught you a lot, awakened a lot of inner knowing and learning. Sounds like wild and dangerous, but intense, but amazing for growth. Ultimately, yes. Ultimately, yes. We'll get, that is certainly a realization that came later, but in the moment, in a time when you're living through such things, going through these experiences day after day, and I'll admit I was blessed to be able to work there and to not have many responsibilities at that time in my life, so I could just do whatever. I was like, yeah, I don't care. I'll drive with you wherever up the coast, wherever. You know what I mean? It was almost meaningless. Um, but it's like your spirit did not consent. I think it didn't. I think really I ultimately just dissociated. It was really just dissociation. I just like was gone, you know, which is a thing that happens to some people. Anyway, thanks for your questions. Would you say this was a prearranged ordeal, likely before you were born, to have met and interacted with this woman? I would I would imagine so. I think just based on the bizarreness and the intensity of that experience. I mean, none of it happened by mistake, you know what I mean? None of it. And there's a lot more that's gonna happen. So anyway, we will get to that momentarily. But thank you for everyone that is hanging out with us. I know some of this is weird for you guys. Some of this is triggering. Some of it I, I can't hear you. Some of this is hot. Okay, no, cool. That's what no, but really at the time, that's the great conflict within some of those types of experiences, is that there is that element, and there's this like allure, of like darkness, that I think we have to come to the full admission that at times it's overwhelmingly attractive. You know what I mean? And if you're one of those people out there that says, no, it's not, it never has been, I'm sorry, but you're probably lying to yourself. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that that exact situation is a thing you would have been attracted to, but you know what I mean? When you get into those situations, it's very much like when you start using real drugs, you know what I mean? Which was also a big experience for me. It changes you, and it's like it's hot, it's dangerous, it's secret, it's unknown, it's occulted, quote unquote. It's literally what it was, and it was wild, a wild experience. Thank you. Colin Sass said, "Did Britain know about her?" No, she did not. However, Britain told me straight up, like I mentioned in the other chapters, before I went to work there, she's told me absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt, they're going to target you. They're going to try to destroy you. I mean, these were literal words that she told me. She said they tried to destroy her. They tried to take away her clients. They tried to blame her for things. They tried to demonize her and all these things. And there was no knowledge of this woman because she didn't work there. She was just a being from around around the neighborhood, so to speak. But I was heavily warned. And even Britain went back to work at that shop for a little while when I first started there. And, there's a whole other story attached to that. I think that she herself was trying to control me on a number of levels. If you want to get totally honest, I do believe that she desired a certain form of control over my life or my energy. And she actually started working there again at the beginning of our experience, but she bounced really fast. She did not want to work there again. I don't think she needed it. She had all her own people. She didn't have any need to work at a store. It was just probably because of me, in a sense. I mean, I'm not really sure, but yeah, I was certainly warned by such things. Did she admit how she found you? I don't think so. I think it was just I think she just noticed my photo, or I honestly, when I look back on the day that we had met, we noticed each other because she was sitting at this chair outside of this restaurant that we had gone to lunch at. And like I had mentioned at the beginning of our stream, it was just one of those people where you see in the world and you're not into them, but you're just like, huh, huh, okay, interesting. And you just keep going and you just keep on rolling. And so anyway, let's go to the next exciting into the next portion of this experience. Once again, for anyone following along, we are now on page 171. And so we had taken this long road trip up the California coast. Sorry, I'm going to make this awkward and I'm going to use allergy medicine on the live here. Just so I can breathe. I know that's awkward and lame. Sorry, guys. It'll stop my nose from running, which happens. But anyway, somebody out there always laughs and cringes when I say that. Anyway, so we were on this trip up, the California coastline. You guys can envision it. You've seen it in a million movies if you haven't lived there. It's like, go watch a David Lynch movie. Well, you know what I mean? You'll see those moments. Anyway, Amanda explained that her father was a powerful businessman that had owned all kinds of properties and corporate entities. And as a child, she would attend meetings, quote unquote, meetings with him and other men. She said that there were other kids there too, and she hinted at something very nefarious, but did not state it outright. I could tell intuitively she was trying to explain to me that she had been a victim of satanic ritual abuse. It had culminated in a suicide attempt she had around age 12 that she claimed had changed her forever. She said she came back different and knew she had a foot in the underworld, that they allowed her to come back. And ever since then, she had been given everything in her life that she set her mind to. Literally anything. I mean, these were real people, man. It was like, you know what I mean? When you're so out of your league and you realize like you're like the lone poor dirty kid amongst a bunch of like millionaires, you know what I mean? And you know what I mean? Those sort of moments, I know you guys have seen that, you've experienced it in your own way, or you've like looked at it in movies, where it's like, hey, you brought this little podunk child from nowhere, this, ignorant little kid, and we brought him in front of all these high priced people. And you're just like, whoa, I was that character. It's crazy, right? I'm like, I was that character. I was just the new guy, the raw source of energy. I was the feeder. You know what I mean? I was the feeder. And so ever since then, she had been given everything in her life she had set her mind to. There was nothing she couldn't have, but it was dependent. Check this out. This is where it gets so weird. But it was dependent on her connection with the sexual energy of others. And as a result, she had attached herself to powerful and dark men all throughout her life. She claimed to have dated actors that I recognize, and even the lead singer of a pretty famous band I was really into years prior. That blew my mind. I was like, what? Oh my God. I won't say the name of the band or the guy. You won't know who it is anyway. But it was just like, what the hell? And so, there was like a long list of like associations that she had with all these, cool and powerful people. I have to admit it sort of made me think like, whoa. Does that mean I'm in the category of one of those people? You know what I mean? Does that mean you see me like that? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe that was my ego being played into and inflated through such an experience. And so it's funny because I recalled hearing how he nearly committed suicide. This artist that had been in that band, how he nearly committed suicide and entered long-term rehab, and that led to the tragic breakup of the band. It was wild to learn that she had claimed to be a huge part of his life during that period. In the end, she claimed that none of them could handle her energy, but that there was something different about her. But of course, I could handle it, because of what I had supposedly done for her in that first clearing that seemed like ages ago now. She then got to her mafioso ex-boyfriend and claimed that his supposed crew had consisted of his brother and some guys that owned a fake auto shop in West Hollywood. They had apparently been running some kind of a fake hospice care center as well that was used for some form of trafficking operation. To be completely honest, I didn't know if it was people or guns or drugs. I asked, but she wouldn't say. And I really did ask. I pressed on that one. I was like, what is it? What are they doing? I swear to God, I won't tell. I promise I won't tell. Please, please, please. I mean, really, I was like, please tell me. Please, come on. I even did that thing where I'm like, if I guess, will you tell me? If I guess, will you tell me? I was trying to like get her to rule certain things out. And she was like, no, I can't talk about it with you. I can't talk. And I was just like, okay, like, all right. And so I didn't know what it was. I asked, but she wouldn't say. There was some kind of truly extreme fear that had been passed on to her from these people. And it was very strange to see it in real life when you often only run into scenes like this in movies. She said she had helped him as a psychic advisor, or check out this word. This is straight out of Godfather, you guys. I swear to God. Or as a consigliere of sorts. But somehow it had ended up with him getting busted, and he was now looking at prison time after many years. Apparently, his entire life was falling apart, and he had been calling her, trying to reconnect the entire time she had been seeing me. I was both fascinated and also deeply concerned this could get very ugly, but for some reason, I choked it down and played it off. She seemed to sense that and immediately went back into love bombing me with those lines about how I was different. I wasn't anything like them, that I wasn't owned by anything, and I could be the one to change everything in her life, that we could do this together, and asked me to stay at her house that night. I agreed without thinking about it, which was odd because up until that point, she had mysteriously kicked me out at the end of each sexual energy transference experience. Once again, I can only call it a transference because this entire time there had absolutely been no sexual penetration. It was as if it had all been simulated. And through some strange act of almost animalistic writhing and childish dry humping, seriously, it's so strange to look back on that and realize it was never even actual physical sex. Or at least that's what I thought. Not until that night, at least. I had no idea what was coming, and if anyone had told me what was about to take place, I would have never believed it was possible. And I don't know if that sounds weird to some of you guys. This entire time, no one had ever, not even once taken their clothes off. Not even. Not even. It's crazy, right? Like, what? Really? You really? Okay, so you're telling me you over and over again, and it was just this purely, you know what I mean? It's almost sounds like one of those, like, yeah, right. You're trying to tell me, and I'm like, dude, I was living it. I was living it there like almost every day for a period. I do want to mention one thing that this is the part that I said I was going to mention earlier that's not in the book. I feel like, is this a good time to mention it? I think it is. I know we're going along with our broadcast today, but I would like to. Well, this is a long one. You can put a vote in the chat if you want me to go through this. We got a lot more pages to go, but so we'll go as far as we can. Maybe we'll end it. I'm not sure, but I do want to mention one kind of external situation that did not make it into the book on the subject of feeders. Okay, and by a feeder I mean a person that a psychic or energetic vampire will keep around them to basically feed off their energy. Now that's an aspect of things within the Luciferian blood cults, where oftentimes they'll adopt an African child and they'll use them as essentially a blood drawing instrument. It's very sad and disgusting. And then there's also the energetic version of it. If anyone out there has seen the vampire movie called Let Me In, not the European one, the Americanized version of it. Well, I've seen both of them, but the Americanized version of it is the one that I have a greater memory of. But in that movie, and like a lot of other vampire movies, the young woman who was a vampire would keep a boy with her, and it was like a person that she was kind of in a relationship with that would sort of serve her, and like in the case of the movies, would go out and kill beings or people and like bring them, so that they could feed off the blood. And it sounded like, as I was like looking back on this experience, I was like, that's what she was turning me into. But here's the thing that I wanted to mention to you guys. There was one time in the early stages of me hanging out with her, before we had even had any sort of physical contact, where she invited me to go to this club with her and her friends. And it was weird because before we went to the club, she told me how she was totally sober and how she didn't do drugs and how she didn't drink alcohol, and she just liked to go to these clubs with her friends. And I was like, okay, cool, cool, whatever. And so we went to this club, and it's not that it doesn't really matter, but it was like literally blood red, and there was red lights everywhere. And she brought in, it was like two men that seemed gay, and then this other woman that was kind of large, just like a larger woman, not like morbidly obese, but just kind of big. And I remember she introduced me to those people, and I didn't really have any ideas about them. I didn't have any feelings about them, but I noticed each of the people that she brought with her had someone with them that looked like, in the case of the 2 gay guys, it was like they were these effeminate kind of subs, you know what I mean? These subservient men, like boyish types, and the girl had this older dude with her who could have been maybe like her dad or an uncle, but it was just weird. It was like you're each bringing a little friend with you. And I remember at the time, I was very annoyed. I did not wanna go to this club with her. In fact, I actually asked to leave early because I was so bored, you guys. I was just like, "What are we doing?" I couldn't hear what the, how it is when you're in those clubs and you can't hear what people are saying, and they were all talking at this table, and I was just sitting there, and both all of the other, this is why it's so weird, all of the other people that were in my role, like the seconds that they brought, how they all brought a little partner with them, everyone seemed dissociated, and they were just like, and I, at the time, this was before we had hooked up on any level, and I remember going to that, and I actually asked to leave, and I was like, "Look, I just have to I was like, "I'm not into this." I was very adamant about, like, "I don't go to clubs. I don't do this. I wouldn't be caught dead there." And she was like, "Please, please come and meet my friends." And I was like, "Okay." And so I met them and bounced. I took off immediately afterward. But it's interesting to note there were others. There were others, you know? And anyway, okay, so let's get back to it. Now that I have said all that, and so I had no idea what was coming, and if anyone had told me what was about to take place, I would have never believed it was possible. After her confessional episode on our mini road trip, I realized that something had changed in her. She turned back into a weakened, depleted, almost haggardly woman in a way I couldn't explain. It was like she had aged 10 years in the energy she expressed that day. That night, she wanted to have sex with me for the first time, and it was nothing I could have prepared myself for. I guess, should we do another trigger warning? Trigger warning. Anyway, it was nothing I could have prepared myself for. This is where it gets really weird and twisted, everybody. The truth is, it was as if she didn't actually know how to have sex. It was as if her body was unable, and we both dissociated into some kind of oddly performative display of physical consummation of something that had already been completely drained out of each of us. It was probably one of the most anticlimactic and oddly depressing experiences I had experienced with a woman. And after a very and short detached release, we both seemed to fall into some kind of feverish sleep. In the time since, I have now learned that this type of highly activated, yet physical incapability to engage in the real act of sexual intercourse is often one of the most advanced signs of a deeply set soul level attachment. In my opinion, she had received some sort of walk in entity or being that had connected itself to her in her suicide attempt years prior, and that being had merged its energy with her consciousness to such an extent that it became her and she became it. It made sense given her comments about how she had observed my natural ability to merge energies with another person. I remember her going on and on about how she claimed I was like her in that sense, that we did the same thing. To be honest, a part of me believed it, and I still do. Later on, I came to the conclusion that she had become the corrupted version of that form, and her ability may have been a result of a vampiric entity attachment stemming from the sexual trauma she had endured. You'll find this with certain people who rise to extreme heights of false light spiritual power. There will nearly always be some kind of extreme emotional, physical, or spiritual disability, a vacancy of sorts, but also an equal amount of raw power that is expressed in different ways through similar channels in the body. The crazy thing is, when you get down to the actual deed, there is often something so deeply dysfunctional and disabled within them that they are literally incapable of experiencing it like a regular person. It was a strange thing to witness and quite disturbing when I look back on what happened next. That night, I recall awakening sometime after 4 a.m. As I opened my eyes, I could see someone moving on her side of the bed. And for a split second, I thought she had gotten up to use the bathroom. That was when I tried to move my head, but I could not. I was absolutely paralyzed. And it was as if my eyes were stuck in position so that I could only look at the floor and the edge of the bed next to me. I watched something that looked like a darkly robed person. Well, in actuality, I thought it was sorry, this sounds dumb. In actuality, I thought it was a moving curtain at first, which seems ridiculous, but when it reached my side of the bed, I actually realized it was someone, not something. One of the most viscerally petrifying feelings of fear I had ever experienced in my life suddenly came over me. It was like I was being held down on the bed by some kind of magnetic force. I realize now this was my first experience of sleep paralysis in this life, and it was thankfully the only time I have ever experienced this phenomenon. I could barely breathe as I watched a withered gray hand suddenly reach into my body on the right side of my chest and begin to move around inside me. It felt like it was stirring something around inside me and also looking for something, as if it were fumbling around in a dark place trying to find something to hold on to. I wish I could say I had prayed to Jesus or God or my guides or some sort of higher dimensional, all knowing intelligence, but I didn't. All I could think of was get the fuck away from me. But of course, that did nothing. I even began pleading with this energy as it searched around my chest cavity to leave me alone. I'm serious, you guys. I was laying there going, please, please stop, please, please, please stop, please stop. And it was weird to think that my mind was blocked from summoning some powerful force. My mind, it didn't even occur to me. It was as if it didn't exist. There was no thought to pray. There was no thought to call out for any force. It was just get off of me, just like get away. And just me begging, please, please stop. Just, oh my God, all to no avail. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only a second or two, I seemed to give up and allow something to happen. It was at this very moment that I felt something in my body start to sink into the bed itself, and I suddenly gained an ability to slide out from underneath it. I wish I knew what it was or how it worked, but in hindsight, I believe it was the process of surrender that allowed it to happen. I was able to angle my body to the side and slid off the bed until I hit the floor with a thud, and instantly the entity had vanished. I got up and staggered out into the living room and out onto the balcony. Her apartment was on the seventh or eighth floor, and I could see a huge portion of Los Angeles all lit up in the night. It was a strangely beautiful moment amidst pure chaos and raw primal fear. I remember looking out there wondering how I got to that moment and knowing full well I had chosen it all. I couldn't believe what had just happened and sat there on the balcony, balled up in a fetal position, rocking back and forth, smoking cigarettes and drinking an ancient and old moldy bottle of water that had been left outside for what felt like ages. You know, when you find those bottles of water on the street and you're just like, oh God, there was a bottle of water on her balcony, and I was just like, I'll just start drinking it. And, it tasted like pure chemicals, but I was oddly grateful for it. After a time, I decided to go back inside and get back in bed. I realize how crazy that sounds, but it's what I did. A part of me couldn't even come to terms with what had just happened to me. It was like a piece of me dissociated from it all and convinced me to just go back in there and pretend like nothing happened. Somehow I was able to begin falling back asleep in what seemed like mere moments. But as soon as I felt my body slipping into relaxation, the intense magnetic barrier returned immediately, and so did the entity, only this time it was already right next to me, almost as if it was waiting for me to drop my guard. But as it reached inside of me the second time, it seemed as if I was able to reject its energy and bounced up, shouting out loud, "Get the fuck off me!" It immediately vanished, and I ran into the other room, this time dead set on leaving. I was putting on my clothes and preparing to run out the door when Amanda finally awoke and immediately flew into a seething rage. I mean, like absolutely, and seeing red, just like in this crazy rage. As I tried to explain what happened, her reaction blew my mind. She accused me of bringing this entity into her life. She claimed she had spent her entire life working for God and that I allowed it into her apartment because of the type of work I did, that this was my fault and I had to get my shit together if I ever wanted to see her again. It was a wild display of sudden hatred and rage. It really threw me off. I stormed out and staggered off down the street to my car as the sun was coming up. I saw the early morning commuter traffic kicking into action and felt so utterly and completely separate from every other living being I saw on that drive home. It was like a moment of clarity after a long drug binge when you realize you just can't do this anymore. The rest of that day was a blur. I ended up going out to work and or going into work and just completely dissociated all day long. I don't even know if I had any readings. I was utterly checked out. At one point, I spoke to my friend Barbara Buck, one of the greatest psychics I have ever known in my entire life. At one point, I spoke to my friend Barbara during the day and had explained what had happened. Of course, she advised me to cut off all contact and never go back. She helped me understand this was a very powerful and fully formed version of vampiric attachment that I had come into contact with, and it was far more dangerous than what I was able to see at that moment. I agreed to never return and really wanted to put it all behind me when, just like clockwork, as the day ended, Amanda called me and apologized. She claimed she was so sorry for what had happened. She didn't actually think it was due to me. She said, sometimes things like this happen to powerful people like myself as an attempt to derail the important work we were meant to do in this life. There was that word again, power. So, in classic fashion, I did the least sane and sensible thing I could possibly do and agreed to return. Immediately, I was like, okay, I'll go back. As I drove to her house after leaving the shop, I was given a sort of game plan in my mind. It was egoic and bold, but I decided I would try to confront her and demand to know what was really going on. I tried to muster up some fake courage, and as I walked in the door, I could see that she had gone through some kind of meltdown during the day. Her house had been trashed, and pictures had been torn off of her wall of strange men. I mean, it was like she was ripping shit off the walls and like tearing them down. And there was like papers all in the kitchen and like just stuff everywhere. So she had torn these pictures down off her wall. There were still some up there. There was a lot, so many up there, dozens, but a big portion of them have been ripped off. Like someone went and just ripped all across the wall, you know. She seemed sick again and haggardly. I felt sorry for her, but also grossed out now. It had become truly sickening, but at the same time, something in me wanted that feeling to return. She took us out on the balcony and somehow assumed the exact same position I had been in that morning, sitting there all balled up in the fetal position, smoking cigarette after cigarette, just rocking back and forth. She seemed to be in some kind of mania. She kept repeating phrases like, I need a powerful man. I need a real man. They're afraid. They're always afraid. And she was literally just like going on and on, saying these really, really crazy things. She said a bunch of other weird shit. She was like, poor people shouldn't breed. Poor people shouldn't breed. She kept saying that over and over again. Poor people shouldn't breed. They shouldn't have this. We should do this. We should. It was like this crazy mania of like, I hate everything. And, I was sitting there like, okay, you know what I mean? You're just sitting there like, damn, okay, something is really, really wrong. And so she just keep, repeating these phrases. I need power. I need power. And so, she said, ugly people shouldn't breed. Poor people should be sterilized. It was so crazy. I just sat there and took it all in. She got really stuck on this one phrase. I need power. I need a man who's not afraid. It almost seemed like a recording or something she was reading, as if it wasn't even her in a way. I began thinking of things to say to try and confront her in my mind. And I'm going to pause right there on that moment to say, in my mind, at this second, I was literally rehearsing how I was going to confront this woman, the things that I was going to say. And it was like as if I was saying them in my head. And I began thinking of things to try and confront her in my mind and hadn't even said a word when she looked at me with pure rage and said, you think you're better than me? Do you think I don't know what you did to me? You said you were real. I replied, saying something I didn't understand. I didn't even know what it was, to be honest. Honestly, I really don't know what I said. It was weird. It was like some words came out of my mouth that I hadn't planned for, and not like, like F you type of shit. It was just, I just made a statement, and I don't know what that statement was. To this very day, I have no idea. I don't even know what it was, to be honest. But she stood up and got right in my face like she wanted to fight me. And we launched into a raging argument made of words that didn't seem to come from me, but certainly came out of my mouth. I still do not know what was said, but it cultivated into a standoff at her door. With I had my back to the door of her apartment. As I told her I was leaving and I wanted nothing to do with this thing, this energy or this vampiric attachment she had. That word, vampiric attachment, seemed to trigger an even stranger reaction in her. She tilted her head to the side, just like that. Like one of those moments, She tilted her head to the side, and her voice suddenly turned sickeningly low in pitch. It became like a deep man's voice. And she said, and I'm going to kind of do the voice, you guys. She was like, I work for God. You don't know anything about me. I work for God. And it was like this great, oh my God. It was like a voice that's not your own coming of not their own coming out of their voice. I work for God, and it was like at that second, an intense shiver rolled up my spine. And in that moment, I saw a red light appear in her eyes, kind of like the reflection one might see in the eyes of an apex predator animal, such as a tiger or a jaguar, or even a reptile of sorts. In a split second, my entire body was crippled by some force of utterly debilitating, visceral fear. And immediately after that, I felt a surge of energy that I can only describe as a sudden uncomfortable urge to vomit and shit myself at the same time. It was overwhelming. I began to double over and tried to open her door to escape, but was so disoriented I couldn't even unlock the deadbolt. She immediately seemed to lapse back into her weakened self and started saying, "What's wrong, Matthew? What's wrong?" In this sing-songy way, literally like, "Matthew, what's wrong?" Like just like, oh. But I was completely blown away. I had no words, no way to describe what happened. All I could think to do was run. I wish I could say in that moment, some kind of courageous and heroic energy came over me, and I somehow defeated or ripped whatever it was out of her. I wish I could say I handled it with grace and strength, but in reality, I said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please let me go." I literally begged her to open the door and just let me leave. She looked at me with a deep sense of pity and said, "But Matthew, it's me. I work for God." At that moment, I suddenly realized the door had been unlocked the entire time. Despite attempting to turn the lock and open it several times prior to that, it suddenly magically opened. And I literally ran out of her apartment and down the hall to the elevator, which was being boarded by some younger couple. They looked at me with the same kind of pity and disgust as the door closed and we went down. I remember as I finally got her door open and left her house, I felt and heard something pop in my pocket. This is weird. This is a weird thing to talk about. It didn't really stand out at the time, but it was something I noticed in the midst of all of it. And I will check. Can you still hear me? My mic got turned off for a second. So that's a weird turn of events, right? Let me know if my audio is still on. I will wait for a reply from the audience because I literally just got a message on my screen that the audio went out. Okay, mic back on. Thank you. Hopefully you didn't miss too much. Anyway, maybe that was by design to help me get back into the moment. But yeah, I felt in my mind I had imagined it kind of like the feeling when your glasses break. If anyone out there wears glasses and if you've ever broken your glasses, I don't know why. I was wearing glasses at the time. I'm not now, but it was just like I felt something in my pocket go. It's like this snap, and I was like, huh? And so it didn't really stand out at the time, but it was something I noticed in the midst of all the uproar. It's crazy to think back on the strange little details that we hold on to from moments like that, but it would make sense later. After that moment, I frantically blocked her on every social media platform I had at the time. I deleted her number from my phone and just tried to move on with my life. I had tasted something so inhuman, so dark, and so powerful that it had shaken me deeply. I mean, deeply. I mean, this is 8 years later, and I still feel weird talking about it. But it's like a thing that I've forced myself to talk about over the years, because I think it's helpful at times for other people that go through the same things to understand that it's like, things like this really do happen for, people. But, I had looked it in the eyes, done a little dance with it. I even ended up with bed. I even ended up in bed with it against my better judgment, all the while knowing that nothing good would ever come from it. The shame and guilt was immeasurable, which is ultimately, I think, really what I took away from that moment. You know, Going home eventually after that morning, it was like intense shame, intense guilt, like overwhelming guttural shame, the type where you can't even look yourself in the eyes in the mirror and you want to just lay in the shower and just, and like cry or rock back and forth. I mean, it was wild, man. In the weeks after that, I noticed I recovered quickly, but not without some kind of strange detox period. that came in the form of extreme depression and lethargy, just complete lack of motivation and a need to hide or conceal myself. It was very much like some kind of drug was leaving my system, and I could tell something had drained from my field when all the girls at work suddenly asked me to go get food with them a few days later. I mean, it wasn't like there was no, romantic nothing. There was nothing with these people at work. It was just like all of a sudden they liked me again, and I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, let's. I guess we can go get a burrito." You know what I mean? And I was like, "Whoa, am I okay now?" I remember thinking that, like, "Whoa, weird. Maybe I'm okay." And so I could tell something had been drained from my field when everybody at work suddenly asked me to go get food with them a few days later. I ended up confiding in a few people there, a few key details about what had gone down, and I was happy to see the disdain and resentment for me had left and turned back into some kind of vaguely dysfunctional friendship once again. Which I'll pause to say, it's wild to think that I was friends with these people because they were a rare group, rare time in my life where a group of people literally conspired against me to get removed from there. And that's not an exaggeration. It's not a lie. It was a literal truth, which that's a story for another time. But, so we had this sort of vague kind of, friendship once again. To be honest, I could tell they didn't believe me, but I was okay with that. And I think part of that was because they had seen this woman through the neighborhood a lot. They were familiar with her. They knew her name when she came in the store because she had come in the store a lot. They didn't know the details about her life though. That's important to be known. Um, so to be honest, I could tell they didn't believe me, but I was okay with that. Later on that day, I finally put the jacket back on that I had been wearing at the time and remembered that strange popping I had felt as I fled her house. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a Danburite crystal that had been given to me by the only person I could ever truly call a psychic mentor rather, Britain, which was interesting to note that she had given me this strange crystal at the beginning when I met her for some weird reason, like, here, you should have this. It was literally like that. Here, just take it, and I was like, okay, yeah, sure, thanks. And I thought it was cool, but I didn't really put much thought into it. I just thought it was a cool crystal. It was a transparent white crystal that had been joined at the base and formed into two nearly identical pieces about 2 inches long on each side, sort of like a V, like this. It was like two Danburite crystals formed at the base in like a V, like this little V crystal formation thing, like two little points coming out of it. And so, yeah, it was just this thing that she had given me. And so I remembered her saying it was a truly rare form of first density life that had an ability to shatter itself when its protective qualities were activated. To be totally honest, I didn't believe it at the time. And truth be told, I have never been immersed in the world of crystals enough to even care. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I have lots of crystals. I'm not a crystal person. I've never been like, oh, carry this stone and you get this ability. I'm just not. I love them. They're great. I'm not against that side of spirituality on any level. It just was never one that really grabbed me. You know what I mean? So, and it's funny because I was working in a crystal store at the time. That's literally what that place was. And so I was immersed in every, like, just thousands of types of crystals every day that I could just play with. And, shit, I could have put them in my pocket a million times and nobody would have ever known. And what's crazy is I didn't. Like, nobody would have ever known. And I just didn't. I was just like, whoa, that's cool. I'll just put it back, whatever, which is weird because everybody that worked there was like stealing from the register and taking items. And like, it was shocking, man. They didn't care. They were like, yeah, just take $20 out of the register and buy everybody lunch. Okay. It's like, what? Really? Damn. What if the owner found out? Anyway, so it was this crystal that I had in my pocket. To be totally honest, I didn't believe it at the time. And truth be told, I've never been immersed in the world of crystals enough to even care, but I had found myself fascinated by it and chose to carry it with me. Once again, like every single thing she had ever told me, it seemed to have been true. And I'll stop again to say that. This is one of the only people I've ever met in my entire life where every single thing that they had prophesied and told me was going to happen in my life actually took place. all the way down to the extent that there's things that are still happening in my life today where I'm like, "Whoa, you said that was gonna happen. Interesting." And I don't know where she is. I don't even know if she's still alive. I imagine she is, but it's a story for another time. Once again, like every single thing she had ever told me, it seemed to have been true. It had split itself in two at that moment, just as she had predicted. I was able to confirm this in a conversation with Barbara that took place a day or so later. Her assistance and non judgmental friendship at that time of my life was indispensable. Some of you guys will hear the emotion in my voice as I say that. It was like I was blessed to have at least one person I could call that had the brains and the intuitive knowledge to be like, hold on a second there, buddy. You know what I mean? There was at least one person they brought into my life. Her husband, Roman, as well, was also very, very helpful around that time. And her assistance and non judgmental friendship at that time of my life was absolutely indispensable. After a week, after about a week or so later, I received a call from Amanda on an unknown number. It was Amanda. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. It was Amanda. She had left a long message about how she didn't know what happened and wanted to see if I was okay, that she missed me and wanted to see me again. And my stomach turned and I deleted the message instantly deleted it. This was the last time I ever heard from her. Fast forward to about 3 to 4 months later, and one day, hold on. Let me take a drink for this part. Fast forward to about 3 to 4 months later, and one day as I walked out of work at the shop, I saw her sitting at the same restaurant next door. Only this time, she didn't notice me as I spotted her fast enough to walk around the side of a car parked in front of the building to avoid her line of sight. She was even sitting in the same seat she had been in the very first time I laid eyes on her, prior to meeting her for the first time. I stood there staring in disbelief as another young man, not too unlike me, with a similar build and complexion, sat down with her. Another source of energy with which to manifest her desires. I felt a strange relief wash over me as I walked to my car. The night was warm for that time of year, and I somehow felt victorious and hopeful. I could smell weed in the air and hear people at restaurants down the street eating and laughing. I felt like a part of their world in a way I couldn't really explain. I walked the streets with a strange knowing that underneath all that fake normalcy, there was truly a dark world of seething evil and depravity hidden right there in the midst of it all. I thought of Amanda sitting there with her unknowing target, wondered about what kind of experiences he would have. I felt a strange peace wash over me as I got in the car. Despite knowing what I knew now, all was well in the world, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. All was well in the world, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. And that concludes our chapter for the day. Yeah, man. That's the story. Let me know if you guys have any questions on that before we roll out the door. But man, it's that's certainly one of the, I would say, the parts of the book that still had a big impact on me. Like, I mean, shockingly. I mean, like you guys can see it here. Like the emotion in the retelling of the story is a difficult thing to contain, but it was certainly one of those life-altering experiences where, you know, you acknowledge that in the midst of it all, it's like I was protected in some way. But it was like at the same time, I had to come to terms with the fact that like I really willingly threw myself into it, like really willingly. It was like, yeah, okay, this looks bad, probably not going to end well. In fact, it could be a disaster, and I'll just do it anyway. You know what I mean? And That's literally how it went. And so, yeah, thanks for hanging out, everybody. In our next exciting episode, we're going to be venturing into yet another really, really, really fun chapter. It's called the Liberation Files, and I have a lot of other additional stories to go along with it. Honestly, there is an entire book of stories that I can tell you about this store that I worked at, but we're going to get into that next week. And honestly, I would say equally as bizarre, maybe a little bit less triggering. Certainly devoid of the distorted kind of darkly sexual energy that was present, within this retelling. It's like, very, very different from that. A whole other, series of circumstances. And, just to front load you for next week, I think the story that we're going to talk about in the next chapter, next Wednesday, is I believe that was the first time I ever got to engage in something even vaguely similar to an actual exorcism, or what I would call a true deliverance, a deliverance of sorts within an individual. And so, anyway, yeah, thank you. White Swan says, "I can't believe we've been here 2.5 hours. Hell of a chapter." Yeah, thank you. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. I don't know if there's any questions. I don't want to keep you too long here because we're already past the point where YouTube will this will not show up on your suggested video feed on YouTube, more than likely, but maybe it will. Maybe it will. But anyway, here's a good question. Red Diamond Heart says, "I have a question. So when you and Amanda were in the sexual energy transference state, was she just harvesting your energy? Did she feel and look drained afterwards?" No, no, she felt stronger. She got stronger. She got healthier. And then it was like it would all drain out. And so it was like during that stage, I would go to her house. We would do this horribly weird, bizarre thing, and it was like she would get strong. This is going to sound twisted, but I'm being viscerally, brutally honest. She got stronger and I got addicted. You know what I mean? She got stronger, I got high. You know what I mean? And I was like, whoa, like just totally sucked into the whole thing. And that's really what it was. And so, in coming and looking at, the data points that I gathered from that in the years after, in my opinion, based on the behavior and the mannerism, based upon the body language, based upon the energy that we shared and the encounters that I had with that person, that is a real living vampire. Their only task, their only hunger, her only source of desire was to extract sexual energy from people and to then use that energy to bring things into her life. And you could see that it had been done very successfully. Before I got there, it was wildly successful. And a part of me thinks that it was a sign of a person who's coming to stages where they either can't hold that energy longer or they can't sustain it longer. Because I don't know how it is with like other sort of vampiric beings, but it was like I saw both the strong parts of her and the parts that literally could turn into an old woman in 5 seconds. And that sounds hard to believe, but it was like there were times and things, especially after the first channeling that she did, where I had mentioned earlier, where we were sitting behind this coffee shop out on Hillhurst Drive and or Avenue, I don't know what it is, but anyway, it was like as soon as that ended, it was like she just went and everything collapsed, and it was like you could just see her face went in this weird way. Everything drained out. So I think it was the constant filling and refilling of sort of energies that but I would say when I saw her the very, very, very last time, when I saw her sitting in front of that restaurant, she did not look drained. I will say that much. She did not look sickened. Well, kind of, but not in the ways that I had witnessed during the days that I had spent with her. It was like if I hadn't have known better, it was sort of like the way heroin addicts are. And I say that because I was a person that was addicted to heroin for 6.5 years straight. And so it's like you see this up and down moments where they're very lucid and very present and almost silly and just charismatic. And then a few hours later, it's like, and they're just like rocking back and forth, and, oh man, such twisted energy. And so, anyway, it's a wild one. What's up, Mary? How's it going? Have you had any clients come to you for help, like your situation with Amanda? Yes, yes, absolutely. Um, there's been a few of them, man. It's happened with both. I would say more so it's happened with women that have encountered men that have that. And to make it even weirder, this boyfriend of hers that was in the supposed mafia, this guy, in a way, it kind of made me feel like he was one of them too, which sounds bizarre, okay? But I wish I could remember his name. It was such a weird name, like a feminine name and not an Armenian name. His name was like Ashlyn, or it wasn't Ashlyn, but it was something like that, like a two-syllable feminine name, but it was given to a male. And I remember in the months after I had had this experience with this woman, women came in to get clearings from me saying that they were being attacked by that guy, that literal dude with that name. And I remember I questioned one woman who seemed to be this very, very tall supermodel type woman. I would guess she would have been Russian or Ukrainian or something. And I remember she had lived in that neighborhood because I saw her walking around there every day. I would see her, and she's one of those women that's like over 6 feet tall. So you'll just see them instantly. You're like, whoa, damn, okay. You know what I mean? Total, real supermodel. She was older now. She was a mom, but she was one that came in to get a clearing for me while I worked there. And she claimed that this guy was like infiltrating her life and he was victimizing and doing something to her. And I was like, whoa, weird. It was the same, it was such a particular name that nobody would have mistaken it. And it was in the same neighborhood where the other woman, you know, where like Amanda had lived. And so I was like, I wonder if in some way, and this is a big leap, okay? This is a big leap. Had she activated that energy within him, and then he went out of control because it was too much for him? Because you know the story was that every man she had been linked to had been destroyed. And so I'm like, did she transfer that energy to those people and then they become corrupted by it and it destroys their life? Or did she just feed off of them until there was nothing left? I honestly don't know. On the subject of other clients, I would say there's two women that I can think of specifically. I would say around 2021, 2022. And also there's a story that I'll talk about later on in the book where a girl had a reptilian that had been attached to her that was earthbound reptilian, lived on Earth, literally physically real person that also had a reptilian being that had attached to it, and we both saw it. Literally psychically, not physically, we saw it. I mean, clear as day within the mind's eye. There is no clearer picture of it. It was very smooth skin, not the dinosaur like crocodilian reptilian type of being, a smooth skin, sort of serpentine like being that it was just like, whoa. I mean, so, you know, yeah, we encountered a few of those later on. Ashkin, maybe it's something like that. Something like that. Uh, Ashlon, maybe it could have been. Honestly, I'm just speculating at this point. I pray to God I can remember this guy's name at some point. I know one other thing about him, and that was that the day that we were walking outside of her house, she was like, "That's his car." I remember saying to her in that moment, I'm like, "How do you know that's his car? There's so many Mercedes convertibles around here. I mean, look, they're everywhere." And she literally stood there pointing at his car, going, "No, you know it's his car because it's this special model, because I know the license plate, because his car only has this certain type of seats in it." And I was like, "What? Okay." And what's wild is months later, I was walking down that same street and I was like, "Oh, shit. Is that his car? No, 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 no." And then I walked past it and I'm like, "Oh, that's the seat. Oh, whoa, those are those seats that, oh my God." Yeah. You know what I mean? We're like, he's here. He's in this neighborhood right now. What? You know, that was a trip. So I did see his car a couple of times. I know for an absolute fact that more than one woman came in claiming that they had met and had an encounter with this guy. because I remember talking about it with another man that worked at Liberate at that time. And I'll say his real name because he was one of the only good people there. Although I do believe he engaged with someone and actually did black magic against me, which, well, that's a whole other story. But I know that's a weird thing to open and then close. But so they weren't, he was a nice guy. We did work together, but there was something else. But he had also mentioned that he had encountered women that had met with that same guy, Ashlyn or Ashkin or whatever the hell his name was, because he actually came to me saying the name, like, "Hey, I saw a woman that she said that that guy you were talking about," and I was like, "What? Damn!" We were trying to figure out who he was. I remember I tried to get her to take me to West Hollywood so I could see the place where they were doing their like trafficking thing. And all I know is that it was an auto body shop that was in a business park with some form of a hospice, like a small hospice center. And there's tons of those all throughout Los Angeles, you know what I mean? And I have no idea where on what street it could have been, but that was all I knew, is that it was some sort of trafficking kind of thing. I don't think it was people, I want to be real. I think it felt to me, I don't know, even as I'm saying this, I'm thinking that I'm probably wrong. It felt to me more like just drugs, but maybe not. We never knew. We will never know. Maybe it doesn't really matter at this point. But anyway, Andromeda says, "How did the robe being? How about the robe being? What do you think it was?" Well, one thing I can say about it is that like in the moment that I remember noticing it, I remember my head was turned to the left, and that was the position that I was sort of stuck in. My head was turned to the left, and I could see over on the other side of the bed. The only thing that I could tell was that at first it was like a walking curtain. And in my mind, I know it sounds ridiculous, but I was trying to put together like, wait, a curtain? No, no, wait, what? And then by the time it reached me, it was like my head was cocked to the left, and I could see like right here. And that's when this hand went like into my literal body, and it felt kind of, it sounds so dumb to some people, kind of like the way someone will stick their hand into a bag of something, and you'll just kind of like, you're like reaching around to see what's in there, like feeling inside it. That was what it was. It was like a gray hand, I can say, like in this shape, like coming down out of the corner of my eye, because my head was stuck to the left, and it was like I could see this like hand go into my body. And it was honestly, that is a, for those of you guys that have experienced sleep paralysis, and I know there's a lot of people out there that have, maybe I was blessed and that was the only time in my life that I've experienced it, but that was a type of fear that I don't think I've ever encountered at any other stage. It's just a type of fear that you can't really recreate it. Something has to happen, there's no way to describe it. It's like, it's not a fear that you're going to die. It's not a fear that, you're never going to come out. It's like the purest sense of fear. Like, and I know that is an ability that certain lower fourth density beings can have. And there's times later, I've talked about this vaguely in like other streams, but I have also encountered other beings out there that their frequency is a negative emotion. It's like a living being, but they give off a scent, and the scent literally just creates a negative emotion in your body. And I think that's kind of what it was. That was it held the frequency of fear, because fear was what it needed in order to extract the type of energy that it needed from people. And so, what do I think it was? I think it was a being that was attached to her that I really believe had sort of joined or merged with the body on such a level that it wasn't like a separate attachment. It was her. It was like, it's you, but it's also this other aspect of you that's been so closely joined now that they're sort of, inseparable, so to speak. And so, anyway, feel free if you have any other questions. Since we've come this far, since we've overstayed our welcome so long, I've heard of other stories. I've heard of stories of shadow people. Sorry, I still have a hard time seeing the screen without glasses or with glasses on. Shadow people doing stuff like that. Yeah, very, very, very much. I actually lived in a house with very advanced shadow forms in the year 2008. It's not in this book. It's probably a whole other book. But there was a period of time in which I lived in a legitimately real life, negatively, horribly haunted house, and I came face to face with two very specific shadow entities to the extent that I would see them day after day. They honestly, we acknowledged each other. It was like I saw them, they saw me. We knew we were there together. We were doing a thing at that time, which is that's a whole other story and a can of worms. But I mean, so yeah, they do. I mean, very, very, very much. And, some would call them archons. Some would call them, entities. I think maybe a more accurate description would be just lower fourth density life forms that can only exist through the loosh and negative emotional energy that they extract from humans and physical bodies. And but yeah, all kinds of wild. Oh, here's a question. Sorry, I saw it there. Spiritual ascension, what's up? And she says, do you ever wonder why these dark things happen to you? No. And I don't think I really wondered why, to be totally honest with you. Um, it was a thing that I just kind of had accepted. But here's the reality. This was not a thing that happened to me. You know what I mean? It was not like a freak occurrence. I was not victimized by this person. It was a period of my life, which I'm choosing to describe in this book, that describes how I got to be who and what I am now. And so, why did these dark things happen to me? It was because I needed to go through that experience to become what, the thing that you see before you, whether that be, beautiful, ugly, fearful, negative, you know what I mean? Depending on who you talk to in this community, they might say a different thing. I will mention a very somewhat, well, I'll say it. I'll just say this. Get ready. Aurora Diamond Heart knows what I'm about to tell. So after this book came out, in the year that this book came out, 2024, I did the Full Disclosure Now conference, the very first Full Disclosure Now conference out there in St. Pete Beach, Florida. And I had mentioned at the time that, or I had mentioned at the beginning of this reading series, that when I wrote this book, I was a part of a book writing project group headed up by a really good practitioner by the name of Jackie Kenner. And for those who don't know, Jackie Kenner co-wrote, or actually mostly wrote, one of Tony Rodriguez's book. I think his first book about his secret space, experiences was in part sort of put together and, pieced together by her. And so they were very, very close. And at the time he was writing his second book, whichever that book was. I didn't unfortunately read it, but he was present in that group. And the reason why I'm mentioning him is because that year in 2024, the year that book came out, I remember going to that conference, and I had noticed just prior to the conference that Tony had blocked me on all this social media. I was not really friends with him. We had never had any bad blood. There was no negativity, at least far as I knew, there was no negativity. And what I discovered at that conference was that Tony Rodriguez claimed that I had done to him exactly what this woman in the book did to me. And he explained that he was afraid of me and that he was petrified by me. He hated me. He wanted me away from him, that I had attacked him or victimized him in some kind of a way. And I remember being like, what? Oh, wait, hold on. Wait, what? Hold on. And so it was just a really interesting turn of events to notice that in the year after, or the year that I published this book, I was instantly accused of doing the very thing that was mentioned in this chapter. And what was funny was is the here's the craziest thing about it, is first off, I was like, "Oh, wow, that's cool. You actually read my book. Damn, dude, I didn't even know you liked me." And then secondly, I was like, "I don't even know how to do that, dude." You know what I mean? It's like, damn, you know what I mean? Imagine if you could do that. That would be, not to say that I would, but it's like, you know what I mean? It was one of those moments which led to a lot of drama afterward. There was a lot of rumors and really negative things that were said about me after that conference as a result of that encounter that I had with him there. I mean, rest assured, like I have no idea. I never did anything to this guy, never even barely talked to him. But he had claimed that I had done the same thing to him, and it was weird because it took me back to those conversations that I had had with Amanda and her real name is not Amanda, just so you know, not even close. But actually, no, it is rather close. I shouldn't say that, but it took me back to those conversations in which she would be like, "You're different and you're like this, and people are gonna see it." And I remember her telling me, she was like, "People will sense this in you. People are gonna sense it in you. Watch out. It's true, it's real. You can do this." And I remember her telling me that. And I remember thinking like, why would this guy think that I had done that to him? What was the cause? Why would he suddenly decide that I had somehow attacked him in this way that I had been attacked in my book? And it was a really, really, really weird period for me that, honestly led to the losing of a lot of friends. There's a lot of people that don't talk to me now within that kind of friend group, the Journey to Truth people, and a lot of those secret space program, a lot of them are fake. Not all of them, but a lot of them are fake. And I realize as a result of that, just printing that chapter, just allowing that piece of information to come out about me and my life actually led to me getting targeted and literally maligned and gossiped about and slandered by people with zero discernment that would just grab onto a story like that and say, "Oh, he did that to me too." You know what I mean? And man, you guys, the rumors and energy that followed me after that continued, I would say, all the way up until about a year later when I went to this party at, I think it was Alex Bloom's place, one of these douchebag parties that they hold every so often. They just collect a bunch of cool people and bring them in so it looks like all the cool kids are around. And I remember going to one of their parties, and it was said by someone there, I won't say who it was, that I actually made them feel the same way too. That somehow, in some way, I had gone to these people and casted some red light energy from my eyes into their body, and it caused them to feel so sick and afraid of me or something. And I remember being like, it was one of those moments, you guys. I know everyone's had this, and I guess if you've ever seen the series Mad Men, I know that's a weird thing to bring in here, but anyone watched the show Mad Men, you'll know what I'm about to say. It was one of those moments where people are telling all this stuff like, "Aren't you ashamed of what you've done? Don't you know what you are? You know what you did to me." And I'm like, I don't even think of you. I don't even think of you. You're not even in my world. And it's weird to think that it brought me back to those things that she had told me, like, people that hold certain forms of power, people that hold certain forms of energy were prosecuted. We were persecuted in previous lifetimes. And it was funny because, as I mentioned in the earlier parts of this chapter, when I was made aware of that in this life, it was one of the most visceral recollections I had ever had, and I had memories of people and faces and things and me being cast out of places for things that I had never done, things that I had no knowledge of, where I'm like, "I don't even know what you're talking about. How can I tell you I know anything about something that I've never even heard of? And you're telling me I'm involved in it." And so it was a weird repeat of small fractal of energy that I had experienced in another time and another place. And so, anyway, just a very interesting little anecdotal story from my real life that I think, in going back to the question of, do you ever ask why such things happen to you? It happened to show me who and what I am, what could happen, what happens to people that walk the path like me and turn to darkness, what happens when people turn to light. It showed me what happens with people that have zero discernment and low ability to read energy, how they jump to serious conclusions that have no bearing in, reality. It showed me all of these pieces of social mannerisms and great waves of dysfunction that had been present in other times and other places. And it was very much like something had to come around full circle, and it sort of came back, and I was like, whoa. I remember thinking at that time, am I being cast out from this friend group for literally doing nothing to anyone ever? Like, and I was. That's exactly what it was. And so it's just wild to look at that in the years since and be like, damn, even Mr. Secret Space Super, Space Boy's afraid of you. You know what I mean? Like, damn, I must be doing something wrong. But the reality is, no, I was doing something right. True authenticity is going to trigger people, you guys. When you drop enough of your guard and enough of the armor necessary for people to see the real version of you, a lot of energy is going to come forth, and there's going to be people out there in times and places and associations in your life that are not going to be able to handle certain things, certain truths, certain elements of who and what we are. And I think in certain cases, while moments like that are traumatic, I think they inevitably lead into that direction where it's like you find the real people and you find the real ones, and it's like you find that all of those things were necessary. Just like, how when I eventually left Liberate the store, it was under very, very negative terms, and we'll get into some of that in the next chapter next week. But just like that experience I had at Full Disclosure with Tony Rodriguez, it was the same exact thing where it was like all of a sudden I was unexplainably guilty for something that I didn't even ever have any idea about. And I was like, damn, man, I wish I would have known. I would have been flinging that thing around all over the place. Maybe we would have sent some to Bill Gates out there. You know what I mean? Maybe we could have used it to create some change in this world, but no such luck. And so that's our story for today, everybody. We're right about the 3-hour mark. I was trying to extend it that long since we already broke past the 2.5-hour mark. So if you're still listening at the end of this broadcast today, I love you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a friend. Thank you for being interested in this information, in this bizarre triggering story and all these weird things. You know what I mean? Probably there's going to be a few people that will watch this from those friend groups and be like, what? I didn't know that. It's real, dude. The dude went behind my back for a whole year after that and told people I was hacking his phone and doing black magic against people. I mean, I've had multiple people send me messages, literally screenshots of their Facebook Messenger and whole conversations that this man had about me, saying that I was the darkest of the dark, the most evil person around. And you know what's crazy is after all that's said and done, I'm like, yeah, sure, bro. I'm like the most unserious male phenotype in this entire scene, but go ahead, you know. So it's just honestly really, really hilarious to see that. And for those of you guys that are here, I'm confident that you might have had some sort of an experience in your own life where you're like, you guys have no idea what's actually going on, but go ahead, hold on to that. I'm just going to go on with my life and do it elsewhere. And that's really, really what it was. It makes me wonder what had happened in that previous lifetime when I had been cast out of this, whatever it was, and I had to go on the run. And it's funny because I mentioned at the beginning of this chapter that in that lifetime, at that stage of my incarnational cycles, I did actually turn dark, and it was by intention. I had been cast out of something. I had been removed. I had been blamed for so many horrible things. They had threatened to take my life. I had been, honestly, they had tried to kill me multiple times in that life, and other people had warned me about it, if you want to get technical. People that are in my life now were present in that lifetime with me as well, and everyone was aware of what was going on. And so it's just interesting to note that, in one stage of that cycle of disapproval and targeting and blaming and slander, at one stage, we became what it was that they said we were. You know what I mean? It was almost like, well, if that's what you say I am. You know that meme where they're like, if you want to make me the villain in your story, go ahead. But don't forget to add the chapter where you created me. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, you created a villain. So, all right, let's become the villain. We can do that. And I had realized in hindsight, looking at this later on in this life, it was the time where I was like, no, I'm not choosing that. I'm going to go that way instead. And so I guess in some way, mission accomplished. You know what I mean? Isn't that the process of a karmic, like, reconditioning where you're brought in, they bring the same force in and they go like, okay, let's see what he does with it this time. Here you go, buddy. They'll bring it back into your life. What are you going to do now? And it was like, I think, when I look back on it, it was one of those times when I made the right choice. And I was like, no, we're going this way this time. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for everyone that has been here. If you can hit the like button on the way out, you will aid me greatly. Maybe one day maybe one day one of these videos will go somewhere. You never know. Right now, we remain horribly, inconveniently restrained by the YouTube AI algorithm. So, if you're one of the few people watching, I would appreciate it if you could subscribe. If you're one of the people that's watching that has not subscribed, please do so. You could aid me greatly. And for everyone else, thank you for hanging out today. I love you guys. It's been a long one. We will be back.